He remembers a world filled with medicine, books, and incredible inventions, like a distant dream. But after being reborn in a forgotten village at the edge of civilization, he realizes all of it has been lost. So instead of chasing fame or power, he makes an impossible decision. He's going to rebuild civilization from scratch, one invention at a time. Can a single village become the birthplace of a brand new world? This story begins with the protagonist, Ash, running toward a village thinking, this book? It was a book. Books have always bound wills. History is full of tyrants who destroyed books. Words even existed for the burning of books, book burning, and bibliocost. However, all their attempts were in vain. Books burned, turned to ashes, but they did not disappear. Some saved them, hiding them in their bosoms. Others buried them in the ground, hiding from the tyrant's eyes. Books are always guarded, and they are guarded from one master tyrant who constantly tries to eradicate their very existence. His name is Time, which always takes its due. Therefore, the struggle continues to prevent books from disappearing under the terrifying yoke of time. Just yesterday, he decided to participate in this grand, greatest, and most fascinating struggle. He is Ash, 8 years old. Approaching one of the houses, he started running and calling out to the priest, Volk. Bursting in, he shouted, "Let him read a book, please." The priest, lying on the table, raised his head and grumbled, "Oh, is that him, the little devil from the David family?" The protagonist happily replied that it was. The man asked, "Well, what's the matter? And could he please keep it down? His head is splitting." The MC apologized and asked permission to read a book. The priest, perplexed, "A book?" He looked at the shelves filled with literature and said, "Well, he'll read a book, and then what?" "In such a remote place," the protagonist remarked in surprise. "Really?" "Well, actually it's fun," Volk asked in confusion. "What did he just say? What was he even saying? It's a book. It's not something he finds entertaining." The protagonist heatedly retorted, "If he doesn't have fun, how will he remember anything? Oh, this unbearably oppressive world." Yesterday, when he was in the village headman's circle, he understood. Immersing himself in the world of books brings peace to the soul. It's precisely because there's nothing in this village that books are so necessary. Folk clutched his head and thought, everything is pounding and rattling. He said out loud, he understands why he wants to read books, but does he even know how to read? MC replied, "No, I can't." The priest remarked in surprise, "So he can't. Did he think he'd open a book and immediately learn to read?" The protagonist exclaimed, "So let him teach him the letters. Isn't teaching a priest's duty?" And so, he thought, he could become the first apprentice of priest folk, who had come from the distant capital to their wilderness. The man, after a moment's thought, said he should know. He wasn't going to spend much time teaching him step by step. He was so busy. The protagonist chuckled and replied, "Well, it can't be helped. But please, let him lend him a book. Even a simple one will do." The priest asked again, "Lend it? Does he even know how much books cost? What if he gets it dirty?" MC reasonably objected. "Of course, one has to be very careful not to get books dirty, but aren't they the kind of things that wear out over time anyway?" Volk admitted that was true. Ash thoughtfully noted that the pages wear out and turn to dust over time. After all these books that are here, how many times will this be read? Wouldn't it be better if someone read it? At least that way he'll get satisfaction, even if he ruins it a little. He thinks so too, right? Volk grumbled, and he has a quick tongue. MC smiled and continued, "So please, let him lend him a book. But it won't be so simple, because he'll teach him the letters." The priest remarked, "Did he think he could learn the letters so easily?" He replied, "First of all, those books he reads at the festival, that collection of sermons, that would be easy to learn." Volk said, "He thinks that will do. If he wants, he has a manuscript he wrote." With these words, the man searched through his notes and handed him the book, saying it would be okay if he got it dirty. The protagonist happily grabbed it, thanked the man, and added that the time spent with him had made him feel blessed by the gods. After a while, he opened the book, looked at it, and asked the priest to teach him how to read it. Volk objected, saying he'd already told him he wouldn't teach him anything. The protagonist quizzically remarked, "Isn't this wrong of him?" He sighed sadly and continued, he'd somehow remember the rest of the text himself. Volk thought indeed. He read the text. "The mighty wolf god, the wise monkey god, and the fierce dragon god, may they grant him great power." MC said he understood. It was a simple verse. The priest had noticed exactly. He taught him how to read this verse. And now, let him go. The protagonist thanked him and went outside. On the way, he looked happily at the book and thought, I've got it, the first step to joy in this life. He was born in the village of Noskul, a place where there's no point in asking questions. Although he thought he remembered his past life, the memories were fragmented and unclear. He didn't know what kind of person he was, but he knew one thing for sure. This life, compared to his past life, was hopelessly primitive. In this village, on the outskirts, there weren't even any cars, fertilizer, or horses. All the tools are wooden. Everything is done by hand. To live, you have to work. And even he, at 8 years old, suffered from back pain due to the heavy workload. In the past world, he couldn't even imagine such a thing. Not even a mention of the incomprehensible past life. There, the food was always delicious. But in this one, you can die of starvation. In his current life, he weeds. Laziness leads to death, and there is practically no entertainment. Quite a bitter fate, and unable to change anything, when he had completely despaired, he had just found meaning. These are books in this world. To enjoy a book, he must first memorize the letters as quickly as possible, Running home, he told his parents he was home and ran to his room. They looked at him in bewilderment. Sitting down at the table, he opened the manuscript and recited, well, in this book, this verse. So, a wolf goddess, a monkey god, a dragon god. These relate to religious images. Judging by the punctuation, that's right. Okay, these are phonetic signs. If so, correlating each symbol makes the expression clearer. After a while, he fell asleep right at the table. But with dawn, he resumed his studies. He never let go of the manuscript, drawing symbols and signs in the sand with a stick. That evening, while tucked into his blanket, Ash's mother, Sheba, remarked that the child was obsessed with learning letters. Did he really want to learn to read? Dabito, his father, spat irritably and said that a man should be concerned with working in the fields, not wasting his time on random things. As a parent, he should tell him that reading books is useless. Sheba countered that she agreed that working in the fields was important, but didn't he think it was wonderful to be able to read, although she herself understood almost nothing about it. Besides, she's very happy that the day has come when she can see her son so happy. Dabito considered her words. Sometime later, he came to the priest again and said, "So please, let him borrow another book." Volk responded irritably. "What? He's already tired of him." MC, handing him the manuscript, replied, "He thinks it took him a month." The priest countered, "You can't learn to read in a month." The protagonist insisted, "No, he's already memorized all the letters in this book. So let him borrow another." The man drawled irritably, "What? If he's lying, then he should be more truthful." The protagonist smiled and remarked, "He understands, but what if he's already memorized it?" Volk protested. "No, that's impossible." He said then, "If he does learn it, he wants the right to borrow all the books he's looking for." The priest chuckled and replied, "He'll lend him as many as he wants. If he learns them, of course. But how will he prove it to him?" The protagonist thought about it. "That's how it is." Suddenly he exclaimed, "Let him lend him a piece of paper and a writing quill." He had a good idea. Volk asked, perplexed, what he was going to do. MC happily replied, "They'll write a contract." The priest looked at him in surprise. He continued, "This contract will be for lending them books, as punishment for calling him a liar." "Really, a good idea? It's also proof that he can write." "What will he do?" "Of course he can do nothing, but then he'll ask him to apologize." He called him a liar. He can't stop crying. He really hurt him. The priest responded irritably, "Oh my God, he wasn't even going to touch him, and yet he's saying such things." Handing him what he asked for, Volk added, "If he can write, then let him." The protagonist happily agreed. After a while, scribbling, he sheepishly noted that he wasn't used to writing with a quill, so it was a bit difficult. Those dreadful letters were hard for him. The priest watched his efforts attentively, amazed. Finally, the protagonist, wiping his forehead, said, "I think I've managed it." He was able to write. With these words, he showed Volk what he had written. The priest, looking at the piece of paper, couldn't believe his eyes. It was true. He had learned to read and write in a month. The contract stated that, as punishment for unjustifiably calling a man a liar, Priest Volk would allow Ash to borrow all the books under his care for an indefinite period. The man grabbed MC by the shoulders and called him a scoundrel. Then Volk quickly corrected himself, addressed him by name, and asked how he had learned the letters. He absolutely couldn't read. The protagonist replied in surprise, no, this was his first time writing sentences and connecting them according to meaning, and he had simply inserted symbols he didn't recognize at random. Volk repeated, perplexed. At random? He was extremely surprised by this. The protagonist asked, "Is that enough proof? Let him write his name in the contract. If possible, let him provide a book that uses similar religious words. An easy-to-read storybook is needed." Sometime later, he returned home with a happy smile and a pile of books. Upon arrival, he immediately began reading. He spent the entire day like this, and fell asleep at the table on an open book. His mother carefully covered him with a blanket. After a while, the cold weather arrived. While working in the garden, he made mistakes for which his father scolded him. But in the protagonist's head, there were only books. He constantly went to the priest, picking up new editions, returning the ones he had read. One day, while collecting another batch of books, he noticed it was getting colder. Volk answered, "I suppose so." Was he really planning to borrow so many books? He replied, "No, he'd read them all." The man drawled in surprise. "What?" MC asked if he had to tell him when he borrowed books. By the way, he had organized his reading. The priest replied, "Well, yes, of course." He thought it was unlikely that any adult could read so much. Good thing this guy had learned to read and write quickly. He's got an unusual knack for it. Maybe he can help him? If this guy's so smart, maybe he can do it. He turned to the protagonist, who was choosing what to take, and said he wanted to talk. Pulling out a chair, the man invited him to sit. The protagonist sat down and asked, perplexed, if something had happened. Volk, opening a small suitcase, said, looking at his intelligence, which he hadn't suspected, that he wanted him to be able to read a certain book. With these words, the man handed him a beautifully bound edition. Volk added that this was a special book. Let him read it. MC carefully took it, opened it, and thought, amazing, this book has a different binding. He's never seen anything like this before. But those letters are unfamiliar to him. The priest asked impatiently, well, did he understand anything? The protagonist said sadly, no, unfortunately, he can't read it. Volk sighed in disappointment and remarked, so that's how it is. The protagonist explained that there were many similar letters in different places, but too many he didn't understand. What on earth was this? The priest replied that it seemed the manuscript belonged to an ancient civilization. MC looked at him in amazement, and in a voice trembling with excitement, asked again, ancient civilization? Volk asked, what was the history of the ancient civilization in the book he'd read? He thought confusedly. Of course, there were legends about an ancient civilization. Out loud, he replied, well, so these are manuscripts of ancient civilizations? The priest noticed. Oh, right. He thought, this guy wants to read. He said out loud, he studied in the royal capital. He'd spoken many times with people who were doing the same research and read every past study he could get his hands on, but he still hadn't learned to read their language. He couldn't read a thing in this book. The protagonist listened with compassion and amazement. Volk continued, having achieved no results, he was sent to a remote village. But he won't give up. He spent a huge sum to obtain this manuscript, and studied here until late every day. The protagonist asked in bewilderment, why go so far? For an ancient manuscript? The man chuckled and noted, that's true. He's strange too. To be honest, he doesn't know, but maybe for the same reason he wants to read books. MC looked at him in amazement, then smiled and said, I see. Then nothing can be done. Volk agreed. Yes, that's true. They looked at each other, smiled, and simultaneously said that they won't give up. Then the protagonist laughed sheepishly. The priest asked in bewilderment, what's so funny? He answered, no, nothing. However, he was surprised that an ancient civilization existed. He just always thought it was a myth. Volk noted that he was surprised. To be honest, he thought it was nonsense too. But, as this manuscript said, an ancient civilization really did exist. The protagonist mused, does that mean the technology and things of ancient civilizations described in the books he'd read so far? Does all of that exist? The priest replied with a smile. Yes. He couldn't say for sure that it didn't exist. MC muttered in amazement. Dining tables laden with food, clothes that could be changed every day. The priest chimed in. Medicines for quickly healing wounds, lamps that maintain their brightness without using fire, large cities with complex architecture everywhere, and the world is connected by transportation faster than a horse. The protagonist responded enthusiastically to his words. He thought, perhaps an ancient civilization could live in a way they certainly couldn't live now. If he could read the words and unravel the secrets of an ancient civilization, perhaps he could bring back rich memories of a past life to this world. An ancient civilization existed. In other words, there are legends in various books. They may have described the advanced technology and luxurious lifestyle of the people of that time. If they can read the ancient language, understand it, if they can unlock its secrets, perhaps they can live like them, he exclaimed enthusiastically, so he would definitely solve all the mysteries of the ancient civilization. Volk smiled and remarked, that sounds promising. Well then they can begin. First, they need to talk about those similar letters. This, in fact, was expected. If they are going to begin research, they need to clarify a few things. Ancient civilization is divided into two periods, early and late. The late period shows developmental features of the early period. All of this is directly related to their era. Incidentally, modern books contain almost all the letters from the late period. This can be easily verified. Writing was also passed down from one generation to the next. Of course, much was lost anyway. He thinks this manuscript was written much earlier. The protagonist answered thoughtfully, I see. So that's why he can barely read anything. Taking the manuscript in his hands, he asked, would he take a look at it? Volk replied, okay. Let him tell me if he notices anything. Leafing through the book, the protagonist thought, many of these letters no longer exist, and others are written in such a way that they are simply impossible to read. The syllables in ancient writing are so complex, he can't figure out how to pronounce them. What if he highlights them? Seeing a familiar sign, he thought in surprise. That's what his father used to draw. Once, while working in the garden, his father told him, excellent. But I mustn't forget to put a mark here. He drew this symbol in the sand and said it was a magical sign of the ancient people. Thanks to it, the harvest would be better. But what if this letter means the same thing as that symbol? So the letters here don't just correspond to sounds, but each sign has its own meaning. Isn't this an ideographic hieroglyph? He turned to the priest and exclaimed, he has an idea. Volk asked for clarification, and what was it? He replied, letters from old languages that they can't read are in fact hieroglyphs. What does he think about this? The man asked, perplexed. He said, hieroglyphs? What does he mean by that? He showed him the sign and said, well, let him look. Doesn't this symbol look like a drawing? He'll explain everything now. He silently pointed at the man. Volk noted in surprise, him? The protagonist answered, yes, that's it. Then he silently pointed at himself. The priest asked, Ash? The protagonist answered with just his lips, him. Volk exclaimed, is he moving his lips? Oh no, talk? He answered, that's right. After that, he made a sketch of what it looked like. The priest exclaimed, he got it. So could he really read it? Now it was clear to him what he meant by the drawings. He replied, yes, exactly. One of the parts represented the phrase, Priest Volk. Writing it out in letters would require more space. The man grabbed the drawing and said thoughtfully, very interesting. That's worth considering. Perhaps the other symbols mean something similar. Then these three parts could be combined into one sentence. That seemed plausible. MC said, if the ancient language was based on the same principle, then the answer is obvious. Volk chimed in, meaning the meaning of the lost symbols was much broader than they imagined. They simultaneously uttered the phrase about wanting to say something. But the priest remarked, "That's complete garbage." The protagonist wondered why he thought that. Volk sighed and said, "It can't be helped. We can only guess." But isn't this a great success?" He enthusiastically grabbed him by the shoulders and shouted, "This is so terrible that it's simply wonderful. Does he understand that?" The confused protagonist tried to calm him down, already losing his balance from the priest's shaking. The man exclaimed excitedly, "He wants to test it already. Ash is the best. He's simply magnificent." MC replied sheepishly, "He's just exaggerating. This is his chance." The priest shouted, "Yes, he's right. He'll consult with him." He shook him so nervously that the protagonist winced and said it hurt. From then on, Volk devoted himself entirely to studying the ancient language. When the protagonist went to buy books, he watched him. He clearly didn't care about his health. MC tried to persuade him to eat at least a little, but the priest didn't even hear him. He wondered how many books he could take. Volk was no longer interested in anything. Even if he were more attentive to himself, it would help little. Life expectancy in this world is extremely short. At 40, a person is already an old man, and at 60, even worse. People literally dissolve with the years. Now he, too, was pondering the transience of time. He still spent his days reading books. He wanted to touch the lives of ancient people as quickly as possible, to feel it. He didn't know which book would contain what he needed. In any case, he would better read them all, and right from that moment. At that moment, his father called out to him, indignantly asking why he was reading some books and not helping him. Was he shirking his work? Books were complete nonsense, a source of laziness. He'd be better off going to the fields and plowing. The rest was complete nonsense. He cringed at his parents' shouts, got up from the table and said, "Yes, how can I help him?" He thought the main thing was to keep his cool. After some time, DeBito reported that it seemed Kato, the traveling merchant, had arrived. They needed to go sell him their winter harvest. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, "Mr. Kato? Has he already arrived?" When they met, the merchant greeted them both. DeBito greeted him back and replied that, judging by everything, he had arrived safe and sound. Had the monsters bitten him? Kato laughed and said his legs had never failed him. The protagonist thought in surprise. He'd always wondered what they called bandits and robbers, monsters. What does this mean? No matter who he asked, no one answered. After unloading his harvest, DeBito declared that was all for today. Kato began examining it and said it was good durum wheat. He would give him 4 copper coins for it. DeBito, confused, asked, "Copper? Maybe silver would be better?" They needed salt and seasonings, as well as a whetstone and a fever reducer. The merchant replied that 1 silver coin was worth 20 iron coins. Kato said a jar of salt was worth 12 iron coins, any seasoning 15, 8 coins for the whetstone, and the same for the medicine. DeBito sheepishly replied that he understood everything. His attention was drawn to a jar of honey. The merchant, seeing his gaze, said it would cost 20 coins. DeBito thought for a moment, then sheepishly asked, "Can I try a little? Or do I have to buy it first?" Kato replied, "That's right, but..." MC remembered his mother told them to take the cloth. If they forgot, she'd scold them. The merchant replied he understood, and the guy was smart. He asked if he could also give 2 needles as a gift. Kato apologized but refused, saying that a bolt of cloth cost 10 iron coins and needles cost 6 coins. The protagonist said he understands. They took everything they wanted. DeBito couldn't stop thinking about the jar of honey. Incredibly embarrassed, he asked if he could have some honey. The merchant replied, "It's special honey. Does he understand that?" But seeing the man's embarrassed expression, he gave in and said, "Okay, just don't let him tell the others that he gave it to him for free." DeBito happily grabbed the merchant's hands, shook them, and exclaimed, "He won't tell anyone. Thank him very much." The protagonist thought, his mother scolds him so much, and yet he's still happy. The merchant laughed and said, 4 coins are just enough for them. When the father loaded the purchases into the cart, MC asked Kato if he was satisfied with everything. The man replied, how could he refuse a regular customer? The protagonist clarified, no, he was talking about the price. The merchant looked at him carefully and remarked that he didn't want to hear about discounts. He said, I see. Are you sure he calculated everything correctly? Kato chuckled and asked, what was he talking about? The protagonist said, he's counting so quickly it's not like him. The total cost of their purchase, not counting the honey, was 59 coins, plus 20 for the honey. He offered 80 for the flour, so he had to give change. Since he was trying to cheat them, he would sadly go to the church to pray for him. As Priest Volk said, to prevent anyone from being sad about this, he would need to discuss this with everyone in the village. Kato thought hard. If he did that, he wouldn't be able to trade here anymore. MC pointed out, it's fine. He simply miscalculated, right? They all make mistakes, and even the smartest merchant can make one or two. He remembered. Before, one had made a mistake, then another. Hey, even hunters make mistakes, right? The merchant hesitated. The protagonist said he'd been trading here for a long time. He had an excellent reputation, and he could definitely be trusted. They should forget about this misunderstanding, right? Kato sheepishly asked. Right? The protagonist smiled and invited him to continue being a good merchant who trusted him. The merchant extended his hand with a smile and thanked him for such a pleasant conversation. Right? He probably owed them something in return. MC glanced into his cart, his gaze lingering on a certain item. Kato, catching his eye, asked if he liked this item. With that, he handed it to him. The protagonist happily said that if he gave this fabric to his mother, she would be happy. Thank him very much. The merchant smiled and replied, Everything is fine, the protagonist thought. The deal is done. Now he knows for sure that he can be trusted. It's good that the price was right for everyone, and he even gave them a gift. He really spoils them. At that moment, the father said, "They're moving." He replied, "Yes, good." He thanked the merchant again, and they went home. Tobito asked his son, "What the hell was that?" He replied, "Oh, just chatting." Kato thought that was awful. After some time, MC came to the priest and asked if he wanted something to eat. Volk turned to him and asked irritably, "What, his wife?" The protagonist replied, confused. "What does he mean?" The man remarked. "Is he complaining about anything? It's rude to meddle in something that isn't your business." The protagonist remarked, "I wish he'd watched himself more closely. And who else is an adult here?" The priest grumbled as usual. "He's just hanging around here." He asked, "By the way, what's going on with the deciphering of the ancient language?" Volk replied that it was exciting, but he still hadn't made any progress. Pointing to the board with symbols, he added that he'd identified some of the signs. As he'd said, if he could figure out the meaning, he'd begin decoding. After trying this, MC exclaimed joyfully, "It's working." The priest said there was still a lot of work to do. Which book did he want to take today? Ash asked for time to think. Volk noted, "Of course they had a contract." The protagonist said with a smile, "It's a pleasure to work with him." He thought he'd like to read a story, but he needed to find something more general. Restoring civilization requires extensive knowledge. Having chosen the right one, he said he was going to church. The priest replied, "Go ahead." After a while, sitting in the church, he looked at the books and thought, the travelogues look interesting, but are there any books on agriculture or blacksmithing? Perhaps they contain more information about the ancient civilization than he could have imagined. He picked up the next edition, opened it, and noted with surprise, a botany book with illustrations. It should be about plants. At that moment, Maya entered the church and greeted him shyly. She looked at him and thought, he's a mysterious child. He's always calm, and more like an adult than adults themselves. He has a smile on his face, but a closer look reveals otherwise. So when she saw Ash running into church with a sincere smile, she was surprised. Church is supposed to be a place for studying, but Volk is always so dissatisfied. Usually everyone is busy working in the fields and at home, so she's never seen anyone studying in church. But Ash goes to church to learn to read and write. Is studying really that interesting? She doesn't like it and doesn't believe that studying can be fun. She wondered why he was so happy. She wanted to know, and to see his happy face again. She herself did not understand how she ended up at the church door. He greeted her happily. She noticed he was reading a book even now. She wondered out loud if he often studied here. The protagonist answered, yes, he borrowed books from Priest Volk. Maya asked sheepishly, is that interesting? He first looked at her perplexed, and then exclaimed with a smile, yes, very interesting. She looked at him in surprise, then wilted and said, is that so? He asked if she knew Volk. Maya hesitated. The protagonist said he was in that room. He'd call him. The girl replied, okay. MC entered the priest's room and said, Maya has arrived and wants to say hello. Volk said surprised, Maya. Leaving the room, he greeted her and asked with a smile what brought her here. Ash noted with surprise, but he reacts differently to him. He always calls him by something. Maya hesitated, then timidly said, she wants to learn to read too. He said thoughtfully, I see. The protagonist thought in surprise, she's the village chief's daughter, but she still hasn't learned to read? Her family consists of her father, the head of Noskal village, whose name is Klein, her mother, Yuika, and Maya. The literacy rate in this village is close to 0. The head is the exception. To rule the village, you need to know how to read, write, and do arithmetic. Perhaps Maya noticed that he often goes to church and wanted to learn too, but the head's wife, Yuika, made it clear to him that books are wonderful as long as you read them. Yuika gave him hope. She's a benefactor. Where would he be without her? Volk asked the girl if she also wanted to learn letters. Then she'll be helping the priest. They'll have to see each other often. He'll teach her other useful things too. It's good she came. Ash already knows how to read and write. It's good they're both here. They, as peers, will get along well. The protagonist wondered in surprise. What was he talking about? Maya noted with confusion. That's right, she and Ash. The priest exclaimed. Then, they decided. The protagonist mentally resented it. How about finding out his opinion? Volk ruffled his hair and wished him good luck, calling him his #1 student. He thanked him in confusion and wondered how this had happened. Waving to the children, Volk disappeared into his room, wishing them both good luck. The MC thought irritably, well, he wanted to focus on deciphering ancient words. Maya thanked the priest and asked the protagonist, he will teach her, right? He thought that if he teaches her to read, he will have more reading friends, and they will have more fun. He put the book on the table and said, well, here we go. This is his first book. The girl was surprised. Was he serious? The protagonist replied, Folk, read this book. It's about religion. If she's heard of these words, then it'll be easier to remember. He was about to continue, but Maya interrupted him, asking in surprise, did he learn these words? He showed her an excerpt from the text and said, here it is. Slow wolf god, wise monkey god, cruel dragon god. This religious text is about great power. Does she know what it is? She replied, yes, then she'll read this one first. He suggested they do it one at a time. In the phrase slow wolf god, this letter is read as an M and this one as an E. MC continued explaining, but Maya looked at him in surprise. He asked, what is it? She became confused, pointed to the book and said, Yes, this letter M. He then went on to explain that the wolf god has a very resilient and enormous body. They pray to him when a child is born or when difficult work lies ahead. The girl said, "Ah, so slow." Suddenly she caught herself and covered her mouth with her hand. The protagonist realized that if he explained to her it would be easier. He continued, "They say that this god also grants courage." She said again, "I understand." The protagonist looked at her in surprise and remarked that if she was interested in something, she should ask. And if he didn't know something, they would find out together from the priest. Maya asked, "What about the wise monkey god?" He said, "Wise," which means smart. "This god helps with learning. Maybe they should pray to him?" She repeated again, "I understand." Then maybe they really should pray? MC agreed to this and thought, good thing she was catching on quickly. The more, the better. If he doesn't know something, he immediately asks. The girl clarified. After they prayed to the monkey god, they would continue? He answered, yes. Sometime after the prayer, they resumed their studies, arguing, laughing, and having fun. Volk, peeking out at them, said in surprise. He was glad they were showing enthusiasm, but it was time to go home. It was already getting dark outside. The children suddenly realized that it would soon be dark. The girl wondered what to do. She didn't like the dark, but she had to go. The protagonist looked at her and said he would take her home. She objected, but his house was on the other side. He also needed to hurry. He said he couldn't let her go alone in such darkness. Volk agreed, right? It was dangerous to walk at night. Let him take her home. The protagonist replied, yes, he knew it. He thought to himself, what was that expression on his face? Maya replied sheepishly, then, thank you. He replied, please, it wasn't too much trouble. Sometime later on the way, MC apologized to Maya for finishing so late. She was full of enthusiasm. The girl objected. No, everything is fine. It's not his fault. But he's so cool. They're the same age, but he can already read. And he knows so much. But he thought the opposite. His memories of a past life. He doesn't know how people will react if they find out. That's why he never talked about it. They'd think he's weird. If he did something he had no way of knowing about, people would ask questions. He exclaimed out loud, she learned so many letters today. That's just awesome. Maya asked doubtfully, right? But there are a lot of unfamiliar letters too. He said that if she keeps this up, she'll succeed. Maya was overjoyed and didn't notice the stone she tripped over, almost falling. The protagonist grabbed her hand and said, be careful. She needs to watch her step. How is she? Is everything okay? The girl, embarrassed by his taking her hand, replied in a trembling voice, yes, everything's fine, thank you. He added, it's hard to see the road at night. Maybe they could hold hands then? She cried out in confusion and surprise. He became embarrassed and explained that he didn't want her to get hurt because she was important to him. Maya felt as if she'd been doused with boiling water. She stood rooted to the spot and exclaimed in confusion, important? The protagonist replied, perplexed, well, yes, very much so. But what's wrong? He thought she was the village chief's only daughter. The girl hesitated and then asked, irrelevantly, what kind of book is this? He replied, it's about different herbs. She remarked, I suppose it's interesting. MC agreed. It's useful and interesting. Although this book is about herbs, it also talks about food and medicine. It contains a multitude of things that can be made from herbs. And it also contains a lot of delicious things. Maya exclaimed with delight, wanting something delicious. Will these recipes be able to make medicine? This is so great. This is simply awesome. He looked at her in surprise and remarked, that's right. Books are a good thing. She will learn the letters, learn to read books, and will enjoy reading, gaining new knowledge. There are lots of books in the church. If she learns to read, it will be even more interesting. The girl promised, yes, she will try even harder. MC smiled and suggested that they try together. After a while, she said, they're here. After that, she thanked him for walking her home. The protagonist let go of her hand and said it was time for him to go. After that, he said goodbye to her. Maya, watching him go, thought irritably, that's it. After they held hands, he could have stayed here a little longer. He was thinking about collecting edible plants. And before that, he needed to read a book about it. The next day, he set out to gather herbs, a basket slung over his shoulders. The protagonist remarked how nice the weather was. It seemed he hadn't forgotten anything. A botanical book was enough for preliminary research, in fact. The day to gather edible plants had finally arrived. The group he'd come with to the forest whispered in surprise, wondering why he was so cheerful. The teacher addressed everyone and said they needed to split into groups so as not to get lost. They'd recently heard that bears lived deep in the forest, so they should be careful and not get separated. Maya told the protagonist she was so excited. He replied, yes, there was a lot to learn from this book. She asked if they needed a herb similar to rice or medicine. The protagonist said, yes, the book mentioned something about that. First, they needed to go look. The girl remarked that she'd never seen such a herb before. He replied, yes, he didn't know either. They needed to look at the illustration in the book. Jekyll, watching them, called out to Ash. He asked what happened. The guy grabbed his hand, pulled him along, and told him to help them. MC looked into the forest in surprise and thought, that's where it should be. Out loud, he answered, okay, they'll go there first. He pointed in the direction and added, I think there used to be a lot of ferns there. At that moment, someone in the group called Maya and asked her to join them. The girl waved at the protagonist, wished him luck, and shouted that she was leaving. He replied, all right, but let her be careful. Jekyll and his companion frowned after her. After a while, they arrived at the place. The protagonist exclaimed, "Wow, there are lots of ferns this year too. Good thing they found them so quickly." The allies began collecting herbs. He thought, while collecting plants is important, he really wants to find the ones in the book. "I wonder if these will do?" He continued on and noted, "Yes, it should be here." The protagonist climbed a tall tree root and thought joyfully, "I've found it. That very form, aloe. This plant has healing properties. It's good for the intestines, improves the skin, and you can eat it. It was like this in a past life too. This plant must be just as useful in this world. What a find." But he didn't know how to plant it. Although, he could look it up in a book. Suddenly, something happened. The aura around him changed, and he lost consciousness. Sometime later, MC wondered in confusion. Where was he? He began to remember. In the morning they went into the forest to pick plants, and then something happened to him. Touching his forehead, he noticed blood on his palm. He wondered if he hit his head. Although the bleeding had stopped, it still hurt. He barely remembered what happened. It seemed he went deeper into the forest alone. And now he didn't know where he was? Looking around, the protagonist groaned. This was bad. If he didn't figure out how to get to the village, they would lose him. That's right, he needed to get back to the village. He had to help the priest decipher the ancient words and continue teaching Maya to read. And he himself wanted to keep reading books. No matter what, he had to get back to the village. First, he needed to get his bearings. The good thing was that the sun hadn't set yet. He began to spin around and said, "Okay, north there, so the village is that way." He thought he felt better when he spoke out loud. He would survive. The sun would set soon, and it would be hard to get back in the dark. So, he wouldn't be going home today. He'd have to spend the night in the forest. Having settled down, the protagonist unpacked his bag. It was good that the encyclopedia was intact. He'd wrap a cloak around all his things. He also had a towel, a knife, and a basket. Everything he'd collected was gone. It was good that he'd brought flint and steel. He needed to start a fire before it got dark. If possible, he needed to find a water source. He needed water. He set off to search, noticing that it was already getting darker. While gathering brushwood and looking out for a stream or river, he suddenly spotted an aloe plant. MC thought in surprise, "Is that a plant in such a place?" "Right, I think he saw it before he fell. Excellent, I should take more of this." With these thoughts, he began to collect the leaves of the useful plant. Suddenly, he heard something. He wondered, perplexed. What was that sound? It was water, and the spring was close. The protagonist joyfully ran forward. When he ran to the spring, he wanted to jump in and drink heartily, but reason prevailed, and he thought, "I'm so thirsty. The water looks clean, but despite this, it's best not to drink it because it contains germs. It's a shame you can't drink this water without boiling it." But he didn't have a kettle. However, he could use it for other needs. When a man is cornered, he has to choose. After that, he decided to stop there for the night. The protagonist lit a fire and looked at the basket with the plant. A thought occurred to him. Yes, this could be used to make medicine for wounds. He would need to treat the wound on his head. Without thinking twice, he prepared everything he needed and bandaged his head. Looking at the fire, he thought, it was good that he was able to start a fire. Now he had some light and warmth. He crushed some aloe and placed it on a cloth tied around his head. And now he felt the pain fading. Or maybe it was the placebo effect? The gelatinous part of the aloe tasted like raw vegetables or fruit. Wild gifts of nature are quite tasty, and at least his dry throat had gone away. He also found some watermelon, washed it in the river, fried it over the fire, and ate it. Maybe he should go to bed already? Exhaling, he realized he was lacking protein. If a snake appeared, he would rip its head off and drink its blood. He would win, and his thirst and hunger would be quenched, and he would eat meat. He sat by the fire all night, watching the flames. The next morning, he lay down and took a short nap. After MC woke up, he realized the fatigue was still there. He also wanted to eat and drink. Aloe, for starters. All he could do now was squeeze the water out of the aloe. He needed water to go deeper into the forest. The medicinal plant had healing properties for skin and wounds, but could be dangerous if used in large quantities. Were there other plants that contained water, or was there a way to boil river water? He had an encyclopedia. Leafing through the book, he thought, here it is, a paper pot he could make. Even over an open flame, the paper wouldn't catch fire and it would boil water. That's a good idea. He could use paper or leaves, which were even less likely to burn. He needed to test it. After a while, he found suitable bamboo leaves and fashioned a container for boiling water. He happily noted that it was no longer a paper pot, but a bamboo one. He poured water into it, set it on the fire, and began to observe. It was so unusual to see something he had doubted. After the water boiled, he needed to let it cool. He wondered what it would taste like. After drinking the liquid, he laughed joyfully and thought, he's alive again. The protagonist decided to boil more water. There were enough leaves. Of course, it would be nice to eat something. At that moment, as if on cue, a fish swam down the river. He thought, what a great idea. Since he had fire, he could cook the fish too, and he'd catch his food with a basket. Without delay, he set about executing his plan, setting the basket in a narrow spot in the river, luring the fish with his hands and caught them. Looking at his catch, MC almost choked on his saliva from hunger. In his mind, he happily greeted the protein and thought, now he will eat. Watching his food fry, he thought, this way, he can catch more. That'll be enough to keep him from starving. He drank some water, and now he'll eat. How good. Today he spent time looking for water and food, and tomorrow he'll return to the village. While he waited, he didn't notice someone watching him. Only after he'd started eating did he realize he wasn't alone. Yuika brought the provisions and asked Volk if this would be enough. He replied, yes, as always, thank her. She replied, you're welcome. Lately, he's been taking care of Maya a lot. They're glad he's teaching her. However, he seemed happier since Ash started coming to him. The priest admitted he was a strange guy. At that moment, the girl herself ran into the church, screaming loudly for her mother. The woman asked anxiously, what happened? Are they done gathering herbs? Maya, bursting into tears, cried out, what should we do? Ash hadn't returned from the forest. The adults became wary, and Yuika asked, what happened? The girl answered, he suddenly disappeared, and Jekyll had only recently noticed that Ash was missing. She told the others. They said he went deeper into the forest and might have gotten lost. But there are bears in the forest. It's too dangerous for a child. So they decided to call the adults and continue the search. What to do? If he meets a bear, then Ash will die. Yuika began to calm her daughter. Everything will be fine. They will definitely find him. The girl, bursting into tears, pressed herself against her mother and asked, what if Ash is already dead? Volk, who had been listening attentively this whole time, knelt down in front of her and said that tears won't help. She looked at him in surprise. He added that she could cry, but only when Ash returned. The girl, confused, repeated when he would return. The priest noted that yes, he would return. He might not be able to cope with the bear or some other evil, and when death came for him, he could deceive her himself. So, she will cry when they find him. He stroked her cheek in a fatherly way and added, the girl's tears are her weapon. Let her use them on him. After a while, all the villagers gathered near the church. Everyone had worried expressions on their faces. Volk thought, Ash has been missing for 3 days already. Yuika approached him and said, everyone is here. They can begin the funeral. The search was called off. She can't believe that a child got into trouble in this forest. He asked in bewilderment, are they really going to do this? After all, nothing is known for sure yet. The woman replied that she agreed with him. She also didn't want to lose hope. They searched everywhere they could, but they didn't find him. And this child is there alone. The priest, after thinking, said that the search may be called off, but there is a chance he will return. Yuika replied in surprise, in that case that would be wonderful, but he should not say a word about what she told him, especially not to Ash's parents. The wait will be difficult, he thought. Is it hard to wait? He agrees with that, but he doesn't think this kid is dead. He's read the books, and he'll definitely come up with something. He knows this guy will survive. He looked at the sky and mentally addressed Ash. Is that so? Looking at the manuscript, Volk recalled the protagonist's interest in ancient civilization, how he wrote down letters, how he was raptly absorbed in reading books. The man asked Yuika if they should wait a little longer. The woman replied, confused. She wasn't quite sure, but she thought it was hard. At that moment, the protagonist's voice rang out. Had something happened? Finally, he'd made it. What kind of meeting was this? Yuika and the priest stared at him in surprise. All the villagers were also very surprised to see him. The MC asked in bewilderment, what were they doing here? Had something happened? The parents, speechless with happiness and surprise, rushed to embrace him. Shiba burst into tears, but this time with joy. They began hugging him, vying with each other to say how happy they were, how worried they were. He hugged them, wondering what they were doing. He asked what was going on. The priest said with a smile, well, he told me so. The protagonist clarified what he had said. Let them finally explain to him what happened. Volk answered, yes, he doesn't know. They wanted to bury him. The protagonist asked in confusion, bury? What are they talking about? How are we supposed to understand all this? He'd only been gone 3 days. They shouldn't kill him whenever they feel like it. The priest laughed and said, he's right. He'd been gone 3 days, and they're already burying him. Shiba said in confusion, that's usually how it's done. He exclaimed in bewilderment. What was she talking about? A tearful Maya approached him and called out to him. He exclaimed, oh, it's her. The girl, not believing her eyes, asked in amazement, is it really him? The protagonist answered, yes, in person. It was hard, but he's back. She burst into tears and screamed, he's an idiot. He shouldn't say it so calmly, but she's glad he's okay. He sheepishly apologized to her for returning so late. The protagonist was perplexed. She burst into tears. Volk grinned, exhaled with relief, and said, and how did he spend these 3 days? MC explained that Ban came out of the forest to him during mealtime. He was startled by a rustling sound, but when he saw the man, he exclaimed with relief, it's him! How he scared him! He didn't expect to meet him here. The man sat down by his fire, and he offered him some fried fish. Ban silently shook his head from side to side, which meant he didn't want it. The protagonist thought, he's the only hunter in their village. Ban goes into the forest alone to hunt. He's an expert at it. That's why he's silent and unfriendly. The children call him scary. He asked the protagonist what happened. He looked at him puzzled, then understood his question and answered apologetically, wanting to know how he ended up here. How should I put it? He had a little trouble. Could he take him back to the village? The hunter simply nodded in response, and MC thanked him. While finishing his fish, he happily remarked how lucky he was. Finally, he was going to go home. After that, he told Ban how good it was that he had met him. Oh, that. It was nothing. He hurt his head when he fell. After a short silence, MC summed it up, just like that. Ban showed him the way back, and he was able to return. Even though a lot had happened, they had managed to collect quite a few different herbs in these 2 days, especially aloe. Girls looked at him with stern eyes. He became embarrassed and apologized to them for making them worry. Sheba screamed. Does he even understand how worried everyone was about him? Maya joined in too. Yes, she was very worried. He confusedly apologized to them. After this, the mother added with a smile, but they're so glad he came back alive. He was indignant. What do you mean, alive? Let them not bury him. His father tried to calm him down. Volk chuckled and noted that he had become more active. He exclaimed with a laugh, he won't die even if they bury him. It's him, Ash. The protagonist became even more indignant. Stop talking like that. If they kill him, he'll die. At this time, Jekyll and his comrade looked at him with a guilty expression. After a while, the protagonist thought about it. After the funeral that didn't take place, he saw Jekyll, who was collecting plants with him, being scolded. It seems he wanted to joke with him and pushed him. That explains a lot. The next day, Ban came there. He was the one who noticed the evidence and found out who did it. He was able to identify the culprit from the footprints. It's simply incredible. Looking at his reaction, it becomes clear that he simply doesn't like him. But all's well that ends well. Even his head wound had already healed. If someone else had ended up in his place, it was scary to even think about what could have happened. It was better not to joke like that. When he learned about the funeral, he thought it was too much. If this happened to someone else, he would hardly get off so easily. More importantly, meeting Ban, he supplied the village with meat and exterminated pests. He had golden hands. Moreover, he knew how to prepare various herbs, including aloe, and where to find them. He learned many things about plants from him, which weren't mentioned in the book. He could get more plants thanks to Ban, and also research them and learn how to use them. But could they increase the amount of food and medicine in the village? So he thought. MC approached the hunter, bowed to him, and asked to become his apprentice. Ban stared at him in confusion and then, with a slight smile, answered in the affirmative. The protagonist's joy knew no bounds. He thanked the man and firmly shook his hand. And so he became Ban's apprentice. And then he returned to his normal life. He helped his parents, saw Volk, helping him with deciphering, and taught Maya. He also began helping Ban and studying plants, primarily aloe. He had previously used it to treat wounds, so he figured it would be just as useful as in his past life. Furthermore, this plant is easy to harvest, so he could experiment with it as much as he wanted. One day, the protagonist conducted an experiment. He found a wounded mouse and placed it in a box, smearing it with this healing plant. After a while, he realized to his surprise that, as expected, where he had applied the aloe, the wound healed faster. This would definitely be a cure for wounds. A real brainstorming session was going on in his head. Where he had applied the aloe, a rash might appear. If he continued, would the effect change? Well, that was clear. He carefully recorded all his research in a notebook. He was conducting experiments to test the effectiveness of this method. The experimental conditions were improving. Eventually, he acquired paper, a pen, and ink. The merchant Kato gave them to him. The day before, he had asked the merchant for these things. Kato asked in confusion, "He wants this?" The protagonist thought perhaps he just needed a little threat. He didn't think everything had been forgotten, did he? He had the money for it. But since this was the chance, he had to use it. While he was pondering this, the mouse tried to escape. He grabbed it by the tail and exclaimed, "There's no escaping it." This mouse was his indispensable assistant in his experiments. MC named it Mulmoth, but this animal is not a pet. He thought that right now he was busy studying the benefits of aloe, and this was a normal experiment. After all, this was perfectly normal. Did he feel guilty about experimenting with mice? Of course not. They were their enemies. There were many such days in this world. Parasites and rats eating crops must be exterminated. Besides his experiments, he deliberately maims these animals and forces them to take excessive amounts of medication. He doesn't pity them. He hates them. Thanks to his experiments with Mulmoth, he understood how aloe works. This plant heals cuts, burns, and insect bites, prevents them from getting worse, helps with stomach pain, and is effective against constipation. In this way, aloe is incredibly beneficial. It's simply incredible. He needs to test its effect on the body. So, he decided to experiment with his own body. The easiest way to test wound healing was to first prepare an ointment. To do this, he crushed the aloe, mixed it with fat, and simmered it until it hardens. When everything was ready, the protagonist applied the ointment to only one hand, trying to use as little as possible. The results simply amazed him. The improvement was visible at first glance. Moreover, his scratches had healed. Even though he'd previously experimented with Mulmoth, he was glad he'd achieved results in his experiments on his own body. At that moment, his mother popped into his room and asked him to bring her some water. Sheba looked at his hand in surprise and asked, "What's wrong with it? It's so beautiful." She wished she could be like that too. His mother's hands were rough and scratched from hard housework. The protagonist replied that he'd tested the aloe ointment. She could see the results for herself. He'd applied it only to his right hand. His mother exclaimed in surprise, "Is it just the ointment that made it this way?" Entering his room, Shiva asked if he had any ointment left. The protagonist replied, yes, he did, but he could make more. His mother excitedly grabbed his hands and asked if she could use it. He said, of course she could, but he didn't know if it would have the same effect on her. It might not work, If it starts to burn, it's best to stop using it, she exclaimed. She understood everything. Let him put it on his hands. When Sheba used it, she exclaimed, how pleasant it felt. It absorbed into the skin. Now would she have such beautiful hands? She smiled and thanked her son. He thought in surprise that his mother was very happy about this. Then, for her sake, he would make even more ointment. No, not just for her. Not just for women, but also for men and children. There are many in their village who need this ointment, so this alone can improve the standard of living in their village. The aloe ointment turned out to be very beneficial. His mother tried it, and the effect was immediate, and the demand exceeded his expectations. Maya exclaimed, why did he have such beautiful hands? When she learned the reason, she was even more surprised. An ointment that improves skin? Let her try it too. As a result, the number of people who wanted it increased. Yuika learned about the miracle cream from her daughter and also asked for it. Despite his words about it being an experimental ointment, everyone would still be interested. The experiment continues. To improve the villagers' standard of living, they need to give them aloe ointment. But he thinks he can come up with something else. Many would pay for it. Right. He could discuss it with Kido and try selling it in town. There would certainly be interested people there. If it brings in money, he could buy something that would improve life in the village. He could buy equipment, a horse, or a cow. He needed to think about development. He needed knowledge, that is, books. He could read even more books. After a while, Maya asked if he was reading that clever book again, and what was it about. He showed her the cover, and she read it syllable by syllable, a guide to animal husbandry, and was very surprised. He praised her. That's right, she's great. And she began to read better. The girl was delighted by his praise and asked, is this about horses and cows? Why does he need a guide? The protagonist replied, yes, they could raise livestock. She remarked in surprise. Meat, you mean? He confirmed, meat. He wanted to make money from the aloe vera ointment. If that money came his way, he wondered if he could come up with something new for this village. But it turned out that livestock farming was complicated. It was impossible without a lot of money. You needed people who knew how to care for animals, how to keep them, and how to start it all. It required a lot of resources. Chickens were easier, and they could scream loudly if they saw a wolf or a monster. He also learned that monsters were different from wolves. By the way, Volk said there were monster attacks during the late ancient civilization. In the early civilization, population growth continued. Monsters, what are they? He wondered out loud. So, should I buy iron tools? Maybe there was something else, or not? Maya looked at him admiringly and exclaimed, he's so cool. MC countered, he hasn't decided yet. The girl replied, that's not true. He invented aloe vera ointment. Just look at her hands. They become more beautiful. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise, wow. Can he touch her skin? Grabbing her hands, he noticed, yes, there won't be any more rash or redness. If she applies more, there won't be any pain or itching. The girl looked at him in confusion and blushed with embarrassment. He interpreted this differently, released her hands and apologized, adding that he didn't mean to offend her. He grabbed them roughly. Maya repeated several times, everything is fine. He thought in surprise, even though she was still small, she was still a girl. Now they were the same age as her. As he thought, she was a good person. Next time he would treat her appropriately. She hesitantly clarified, so it won't hurt or itch? She was glad that her skin had become smooth. The protagonist said yes, he was too. Did her mother also use the ointment? Maya replied, yes. She liked it. He noticed, good. Then he offers to start today's lesson. She happily agreed and asked, will they learn to read today too? The protagonist said, for starters, they'll learn new words. Meanwhile, Yuika was thinking about MC. He's created a new ointment. It's similar to what they did in an ancient civilization, like a researcher at their temple, but a temple in the royal capital, not in the provinces. But he's just a small child. Although she didn't believe it, the result, judging by the condition of her skin, was genuine. In this village, where nothing like this had ever existed before, something amazing had suddenly appeared. She managed to manage the resources they had, and she was always worried about whether she could pass on the legacy to the next generation. But suddenly new resources appear. It's simply incredible. Therefore, this ointment will become popular. Ash has done so much, but there may be people who don't like it, and that could upset him. She needs to think of something. Right. I could invite him to dinner and discuss the ointment. I'd be interested to hear his thoughts. If everything goes smoothly, it could be an important moment in the history of this village. After a while, the protagonist thought excitedly. In gratitude for the ointment, he'd been invited to dinner. This was the village headman's family. Maybe they wanted to participate in the experiment too? He knocked on the door and Maya came out to him and shyly wished him good evening. He greeted her and thanked her for the invitation. She's so beautiful today. It suits her very well. The girl, blushing to the roots of her hair, shyly expressed her gratitude and, stuttering with excitement, also admired his appearance. He looks great. The protagonist thanked her and thought, despite being invited, it was a hassle. His parents were acting strangely. Let him wear this. Let him take this. He preferred his home clothes. When the allies arrived at the village chief's house, Yuika, taking her daughter by the shoulders, said, He really does look like a true gentleman, he responded, confused. It's a great honor. The woman invited him inside and make himself at home. The village chief also greeted him with a smile. When everyone sat down at the table, Yuika said, "So, they have a guest. So, they will now have dinner." Looking at the dishes, MC admired how delicious they were. Yuika smiled and said he could eat as much as he wanted. Ash said, "Good, bon appetit." When he tried the food, his delight knew no bounds. He couldn't even speak for pleasure. Maya remarked, "Ash is a true gentleman and so smart." He replied admiringly, "Their food is so delicious. How unreal. Is he really here? Maybe he's dreaming this? Everything is delicious. Yuika is simply an excellent cook." He envies her husband, although it's too early for him to think about it. The woman, confused, said, "She's glad." After that, she turned to her husband and asked if he'd heard that. She'd been praised. The protagonist thought, he really is envious. But Yuika really is the most elegant in the village, which isn't surprising since she's not from around here. She was born and raised in a powerful family. When the village chief went to negotiate, he fell in love with Yuika. There was some heroic story there, but he doesn't know that. Are children allowed to know such things? After a while, he thanked her for the food and added that everything was delicious. Yuika replied, "She's glad." Left alone with him, the woman continued, "Well, she wanted to ask him something. Would he mind?" The protagonist replied, "No, of course not. Let her ask." Surely he'd thought about what she wanted? The woman said, "He made aloe vera ointment. She heard he wanted to sell it to Kato. Was that true?" He replied, "Yes." He'd only been thinking about it for now. Yuika drawled thoughtfully. Clearly that was what she wanted to know. Yes, he could easily sell it. He could even get a lot of money for it. Many would be interested in this remedy. He, not understanding where she was going with this, answered cautiously, "Well, yes, everything can be bought and sold." She looked at him in surprise and said, although Maya had told her, she didn't think he knew such expressions. MC exclaimed, "It was all Teacher Volk." He thought, even though he'd never taught him, he wouldn't tell. Teacher Volk made him like this. She smiled and noted that Priest Volk had done something to him. He'd told him about that expression. She'd spoken with the village chief. If he wanted to do it, then go ahead. If any questions arose, they could work it out together. He exclaimed in surprise, of course. Thank them very much. He apologized in advance for any trouble he might cause in the village. He thought, in fact, all this time he'd thought he was being naive. He didn't want to spend money because he needed to save. And his father might not like it. His father would buy alcohol and say they'd worry about the village later, and it would just be money down the drain. Yes, that's probably how it would be. To help the village, they needed to buy a lot. They had to save. And if they didn't, he'd be angry. What should he do? Maya, seeing his thoughtful expression, suddenly shouted angrily at her mother, telling her not to offend him. He noted with a smile that no one was offending him. On the contrary, they were treating him too well. Yuika gasped and asked with a smile, "Is she going against her mother?" The protagonist was confused, wondering where that evil smile was coming from. But it suits her. She's so beautiful. Maya screamed again, telling her not to hurt Ash. She doesn't like it. Her mother asked, "Why? Does she want to help him?" He thought, if Yuika has decided on something, it will stay that way. Otherwise, it will upset the balance in the village, and there's no convincing her. The girl grew even angrier. "Don't do this. Ash is saving money for the village. He wants to buy livestock, and he wants to know which animal is best." Yuika gasped and said, "She didn't know that." Maya replied, "That's right. He's always thinking about the village. He's really cool." Her mother remarked with a smile, "And he is very handsome too. Right?" The girl shouted heatedly. "Yes, of course." The protagonist watched them in confusion, then said sheepishly, "They've praised him too much. He feels awkward." Maya fell silent, and only when the meaning of what she'd said sank in, did she blush with shame and exclaim, "What did she just say?" She lost her balance in surprise and would have fallen if her father hadn't caught her in his arms. Yuika, smiling, whispered to MC, "Their daughter believes in him." She overheated and was incapacitated. He asked, puzzled, "What happened?" The woman smiled again and added, "She's so sweet." The protagonist automatically noticed Yuika's elegant laugh. Calming down, she invited him to continue their conversation. "So he wants to get money for the ointment, buy livestock and equipment for the village?" He replied, "Yes, that's true. Life in their village is hard, so he wanted to make it a little easier." The woman pointed out that he wanted to buy all of this, and she thought he wanted to buy food from the merchant. He considered it. Even if it would help his family, then he would agree. But if possible, he would like to remember at least a little about his past life. Not a little, but a lot. Yes, that's right, a lot. His wishes aren't the best. Right now, he has nothing. It's as if he'd had a dream, and he'd been able to touch it, but only a little. If he wants to make this dream come true, he needs to rely on society. He can't do anything alone. He could use the strength of 100 people, but if even 100 couldn't do it, he'd use the strength of 10,000. For that, 10,000 people must work their hardest. Even if it's impossible, he'll still try. He said out loud that simplifying his life isn't enough. If everyone is happy, he's happy too. But he has no intention of becoming a saint. For him, the best praise is the happiness of others. Yuika looked at him in amazement and asked him about praise. The protagonist became embarrassed and replied that it was just a child's dream. Like in books, he wants to live a good and prosperous life. He thought about consecration for creating a sewer system, new clothes, and hygiene products. delicious alcohol, and the absence of hunger. Machines do the heavy lifting, transport faster than horses, connecting the entire world. He wants to use his principles and logic to understand how to harness raw human wisdom, just like in the days of ancient civilization. Yes, he wants to learn more about that era. It's impossible to do this alone. He definitely needs help and influential people. Yuika said they could solve everything together. He agreed to it. He, like a greedy dream hunter, continues to chase it. He said out loud that he would donate all proceeds from the sale of aloe ointment to the village. The woman remarked in amazement. Maya said he was interesting. In fact, he's scary. He smiled and replied, he's not the plague. There's no need to fear him. Smiling, Yuika said that although he was a newbie at this, it was nice to receive this offer from him. Shaking his hand, she added that she would be waiting for good news. He thanked her and thought he was glad to cooperate with her. It would simplify negotiations with the village chief and Kato. Perhaps, with his help, he could establish contacts with the city. He wanted to sell the ointment right away and make money. He would improve life in the village. He would be satisfied with even a minimal profit. The first step had been taken, but it would be difficult from here. He needed to read even more books. This was a big step, but he would try. Meanwhile, in another room, the village chief tucked his daughter into bed, straightened her blanket, and wished her a speedy recovery. The girl thought about the protagonist and would like to invite him to start tomorrow. After some time, the protagonist came to Yuika, said hello, and announced that he had brought the recipe for the ointment they had discussed earlier. The woman thanked him in surprise, but he replied, "You're welcome," Yuika remarked, holding the recipe in her hands. Of course, just slice it thinly and heat it up. It wasn't as difficult as she imagined. They could try, as long as they had the ingredients. MC said that if it doesn't work out, she should tell him. Yuika promised him this. He gave her the plant and added, "Here are the ingredients." He had recently been in the forest with Ban and let her decide the price herself. He's not great with finances, so he's relying on her for this. His share will be minimal. Yuika asked, "Is he sure? He invented this ointment after all, and he's giving it all to her?" The protagonist looked at her and replied, "He wants to collaborate with her. He can't do it alone. He doesn't know much, so he's trusting her. He just has to trust her and rely on her. Of course, he'll do his best. Please let her handle the buying of the ingredients." Yuika smiled and said, "Yes, fine. Then she'll handle the sales." He thanked her. She continued, "For starters, let him do a little more, and she'll see how much he can earn. By the way, Maya wanted to help too." The protagonist exclaimed, "Good idea. He thinks she can already read the recipe." Yuika noticed that her daughter learned to write and read thanks to him. "Thank him very much for that." He laughed and said, "No problem. She's really great." The woman thought in surprise. He was simply incredible, but he didn't understand why Maya was doing this. He hadn't known with what delight she told her what she and Ash did today. She thought about what she would do for her daughter. What she could, she would also try. Out loud, she said, well, if they could make more, she would like to send some to her parents' house through the merchant. He wouldn't mind? The protagonist exclaimed in surprise. Wow, that's great. He wouldn't mind. He would only be happy. The protagonist thought enthusiastically. Her parents? As they said goodbye, she said she would report to him on the progress of this project. He thanked her and replied that he would look forward to it. On the way home, he thought, Yuika will take care of the aloe ointment. He will do something else. For example, he'd start working on mouse poison in the warehouse. After some time, autumn arrived. Yuika contacted him about selling the ointment, and here it was, the result. A single bronze coin. He was overjoyed. As Yuika had said, she'd given some to her parents, and they'd decided to sell the ointment as a rare item. Looking at the coin, he rejoiced. This was his first income. It could buy a quarter of the winter harvest. He was glad Yuika had taken care of everything. They were starting a small business. Finally, he could pay Kato for the paper and quills. So he thought. But the merchant flatly refused to take payment. He exclaimed, "No, thank you. Let him enjoy it." He said that thanks to the ointment, he could now trade with the rich people in town. He could consider himself promoted. He was so happy that he could now trade with the Amanobe family. It was simply his dream. The merchant thanked him endlessly and promised to keep coming back. That's how it all ended. He got the money, but as soon as he brought it home, his father wanted to buy some booze, so the protagonist made a decision. He went to Volk, and holding out a coin, said he should take the money as collateral. The priest was indignant. This was a church. They didn't do that sort of thing. He insisted then it was a donation he'd later take back. Volk declared that donations didn't work that way. Besides, he could steal it. He shouldn't think he was so kind. The protagonist remarked in surprise, but he was a priest. Volk snapped back. Everyone wanted money. MC said then, they'll do it this way. If he doesn't take the money as collateral, it will be a joint research fund. They can use the money to study the language of an ancient civilization. If he deciphers ancient words, he's with him. The priest thoughtfully remarked, a research fund. An interesting idea. Research isn't free. The money can be used when he's in the capital. At that moment, Maya arrived and said she heard Ash's voice. Is he here? The priest greeted her and told MC as he escorted him out. It's time for classes. He was indignant. He was trying to get rid of him again. Volk replied, he's simply his best student. Sending him out with Maya, he slammed the door behind them. The protagonist exhaled and said, there's nothing you can do about it. The girl silently thanked the priest. Out loud, she said, by the way, her mother wants to make aloe vera ointment because it sells well, and some villagers want to help too. What did he think about that? he replied, laying out the books on the table. Let Yuika handle it. He trusts her. And let her tell the villagers that they can help if they want. And let her forgive him for asking her to pass this on. Maya protested. No, everything is fine. She wants to help him. The protagonist suggested she study hard today too. After a while, Yuika clapped her hands and thanked the girls from the village who had volunteered to help her, for helping the village in its new endeavors. For starters, they needed to work together. She would tell them how to make the ointment. The girls happily accepted the offer. Ultimately, Yuika decided to increase production of the healing ointment. To do this, she had to recruit more people, since it required free hands. Those with financial problems were hired. Also, those who had lost a working family member came. In short, women unsuited to heavy work. MC noted that the rest of the villagers were unlikely to agree. It was a good idea. If Priest Volk was a good scientist, Yuika was a good manager. So, the first step was to increase production. And since these workers couldn't read, it was decided to teach them the recipe and how to read. Seeing one of the workers, Philtania, awkwardly cutting a plant, he approached her and showed her, telling her to do it safely and slowly when cutting aloe. The girl replied that she understood everything and thanked him. The girl suggested he call her by her first name, Tanya. The protagonist agreed and added that if she had any more questions, she could ask him without hesitation. She thanked him for his help and added that she understood him. Pointing to the recipe, Philtania noted with embarrassment that she couldn't read it. It was hard to figure out what to do. He replied that they would do it, and he would explain how to read it. And so they agreed. The girl, watching Maya also reading the recipe to the employee, asked in surprise, "Can she read too?" The protagonist said yes. They'd studied together at church. She replied, "I see," and then stared at the recipe again, asking, "What's written there?" He read how to make aloe vera ointment, and below was the recipe. Step by step. Remove the thorns from the aloe vera leaf, then peel the skin. After a while, when the cream was ready, the employees exclaimed in surprise, "It's done." Yuika thanked them with a smile and praised them. They'd done a good job. A little more practice and they'd be good at it. They could try it out for themselves today. If you rub this cream on your skin, it will become beautiful. Philtania, looking at the drop of ointment, exclaimed in surprise, "So that's it." By the way, her mother used to make something similar. MC turned sharply at her words, quickly approached her, and asked her to tell him more about it. What was this, something similar? She said her mother used to make a similar ointment and used it for treatment. She thought it was for rough skin. The protagonist remarked in surprise. Indeed, it did resemble an aloe vera remedy. Philtania added, but there were different ingredients. He exclaimed, "What kind?" The girl smiled sheepishly and said, "Well, I think she used honeycomb." He asked in amazement, "Honeycomb, not honey?" She said, "No, honeycomb. Honey was only for food," and she didn't remember honeycomb being used for anything else. Maybe she'd forgotten. The protagonist thought, honeycomb? Really, that's what it was? Use such an ingredient? That's something he doesn't know. Bees also work to create honeycomb. This ointment interested him, but only her mother knew the recipe. But her parents had died, so she came here. Philtania's father was the only beekeeper here. But after her father, her mother, who had also been a beekeeper, died. In the end, only Philtania and her younger brother Jekyll remained, knowing nothing about beekeeping, all because of the hard village life. Had the incredible knowledge and skills of the ancient civilization also disappeared in the same way? The girl apologized to him. She didn't want to talk about the bad stuff. She would like to help him with beekeeping. He assured her that everything was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. Honey was delicious, and the nutritional value of this product was high. Since they needed honeycomb, he would like to learn more about beekeeping. Yuika remarked with a smile, "This industry is an important thing in the village, right?" He was delighted to see her and exclaimed, "She's just in time." Did she think so too? The woman laughed and replied, "Of course." When she was doing beekeeping with Philtania, she made candles and they helped her. MC was surprised. Even candles? This is simply incredible. He has an idea. They don't have the money to raise livestock like cows or horses, but what about beekeeping? It's more feasible for them. Yuika replied, she thought so too. He was enthusiastic about the idea and remarked that he needed to learn more about it to improve life in the village. She remarked approvingly. He was so driven. The protagonist mused. He'd never seen a book on the subject in the church. First, they needed to get a book. Until then, they were powerless. Yuika countered with a smile. She wouldn't say they were powerless, but for now, there was nothing they could do about it. She'd ask her parents for information. Philtania, who'd been listening attentively to their conversation, mentioned, by the way, the book her father was reading had bees in it. Would that help them? They both stared at it in surprise. The protagonist exclaimed joyfully, "Really? Really? Are there really books in their village other than the church? Can they read it? Maybe it'll help with beekeeping." The girl replied, "Okay." He, his eyes shining with delight, thanked her and suggested they go now. Philtania was surprised. What, right now? She hadn't cleaned the house. MC assured her, "Don't worry, please let them go right now." Yuika said, confused. "Why don't they go next time?" He replied, "Okay." And then, suddenly throwing his head up, he exclaimed, "Then let him read it outside." Philtania was surprised by his request. The protagonist continued, "He can read it in front of her house." The girl didn't understand. Was he so impatient? He shouted, "Yes, the sooner the better. If there's a book, he wants to read it." Yuika clutched her head and said, "What should I do?" Philtania hesitated, and Maya said with a smile, "You can't convince him otherwise." The protagonist persisted. "So what can we? What should he do? Let her say it. He'll do anything." In the end, Philtania agreed. He happily thanked her and ran ahead of the girl, shouting at her to hurry up. He couldn't wait to read the book. Maya tagged along. One of the workers watching them go remarked that Ash had become so active. Yuika replied that everyone in the village probably thought so. After some time, Philtania brought him the coveted item. MC took it almost with trepidation and read, "Practical Beekeeping." Opening it, he began to read the contents. Bee species suitable for beekeeping, habitat radius and processing temperature, how to handle bees, how to collect honey, wintering conditions, and even methods for collecting honey. He thought he didn't expect to see so much information. It's simply incredible, but these letters were used during the ancient civilization. It seems some letters have survived to this day, but they are not commonly used. He recalled Volk's words. Early letters are complex, so scientists study letters from later civilizations. He'd also learned this during his research. This book uses letters from a later civilization. Despite the difficulty of explaining beekeeping, he doesn't think it can be written in modern letters. It was apparently written during the late civilization. This book itself is an antique. Was such a valuable item found in this village? Maya asked. "So much has been written about bees, right?" He replied, "Yes, it's an interesting book. He should study it further. They could use it to start beekeeping." Philtania had no idea they had such a valuable item in their house. She thought she'd like to read it too. She looked at the protagonist and Maya. He asked how her father had obtained this book. The girl replied that, according to him, it was a family heirloom. Their ancestors began using it for beekeeping many years ago. She didn't know where it came from, but it must have come from a great beekeeper, famous beyond the village. She'd only heard that this book was important to the family. That's what she'd been told. The protagonist said he thought it was true. Her ancestors might have read this book. The beekeeping techniques described therein were quite modern. This edition is very old in itself, and this thing is very important. He could boldly say it was a treasure. Philtania exclaimed in surprise. It couldn't be. This thing was so valuable, it was simply unbelievable. He thoughtfully noted that it truly was a relic. Their ancestors had read this book, collecting and preserving information. The girl looked at him in surprise. He thought, this humble sage who says nothing. How long had he lived? It seemed Philtania's family hadn't read this book in a long time. This sage, their relic. He came here to read it. Unfortunately, they were protecting books they could practically not read. It was difficult, pointless, but the book was here. A young descendant had lost the family's beekeeping skill, and here he was. MC felt a surge of determination. Fight those who wanted to destroy this relic, a bold will. He turned to Philtania and said, her ancestors, and what they protected. They inherited the beekeeping skill. She wanted to inherit it herself this time? The girl stared at him in confusion and asked, should she become a beekeeper? But she can't read. The protagonist replied, as for the contents, he can retell it to her. And anything unclear, they would study together. All they needed was the will to fight this time. Her desire to regain the lost skill would be enough. She looked at him in confusion and said, she knows it. She'd always dreamed of this. Since childhood, she'd wanted to help her parents. She'd always wanted that. But without teaching her, her parents died. All that remained was this book. She couldn't even read what it said. So, she had already given up. So she had to take everything upon herself. She had lived like this up until this point. But yes, she wants to find out what it is. She wants to try, like her mother and father. He looked at her with a smile and said, good. Her ancestors can rest easy. She will protect their life's work. Philtania smiled, dreamily closed her eyes and answered yes. MC thought happily. He welcomed another dreamy and striving friend. Her family's fight will be won. What could have been lost is ultimately inherited. He exclaimed enthusiastically. Then, we must hurry. Where to start beekeeping? She needs to read the book quickly. Considering the time when this thing was written, it could be useful for studying the ancient language. First, she needs to show this to Father Volk. He will like it too. He turned to Philtania and said, if possible, he would like to borrow this. He wants to take it to the church. May he? The priest at the church also knows how to handle books, and he'd like to read this whole thing. The girl replied, confused, if he handles it carefully, then fine. The protagonist, clutching the relic to himself, assured her, of course, he would protect it with his life. Besides, he has poison, so he could experiment on mice. The girls, looking at him, remarked in surprise, he was so scary. He laughed and said, no need to be afraid of him. At this point, Jekyll, watching them, said angrily, now he's with not only Maya, but also his sister. The protagonist exclaimed, there's no point in wasting time. They need to take the book to the church. He and Maya set off. He asked her if she could pass on something to Yuika. They'd soon start beekeeping, and Philtania would become a beekeeper. Would she pass it on? The girl replied, okay. Will they read this book together? He assured her, of course. It's going to be a little challenging, but fun. At that moment, Jekyll and his friends called out to him. He asked what he needed. The boy asked, let's talk. The protagonist replied, unfortunately he couldn't. He needed to deliver an important book to the church. They could do that later. After that, he turned to Maya and said, "Let's go." He didn't want the book to be out in the open for too long. Jekyll called him a coward and shouted, "Don't run away." He, a weakling, was afraid of him? Maya asked in confusion, "What are they saying?" She'd answer them now. The protagonist stopped her and said, "It's okay, there's nothing to worry about." They needed to go faster. Jekyll grabbed a stone and threw it angrily at MC's back, cursing. The stone flew past the protagonist. Jekyll screamed, made some ointment, and immediately became arrogant. Next time he won't miss. Maya indignantly shouted at this bully, "How can he do such a thing?" The protagonist gave her the book and told her it was dangerous here, to take this and move away. The girl complied. MC looked at the guy and addressed him by name. Jekyll exclaimed, "What a problem." Ash thought with irritation and anger. He would never allow the book to be harmed. He extended his hand and shouted, "I'm warning you." He threw a rock, and he's taking it as an attack. They can use weapons or other things too. He's ready to fight back. He has an axe, traps, and poison, and he won't be afraid to use them. If he throws a rock again, he'll never forgive him. Jekyll, not expecting such a rebuff, just stared at him silently. The protagonist turned to Maya and asked if she was hurt. Was she okay? The girl sheepishly replied, "Yes, she's fine, thank you." He remarked, "Well done," but they needed to move faster. Sometime later, Maya was telling her mother, and then Jekyll and the others said a lot of bad things to the protagonist, and even threw a stone, and Ash stood up and protected her. At that moment, from behind, he looked cool. She was like a princess, protected by a knight. Yuika remarked in a frustrated voice, "Jekyll and the others, huh?" The girl looked at her mother in confusion. The woman addressed her by name and asked to listen to what she had to say. About the protagonist? People like Jekyll don't like people like Ash, and there could be many of them. She herself knows how good he is. He learns letters, can read, and has created an ointment. Not even all adults can do that. He continues to strive forward. He will continue to do many amazing things. The day when he will leave the village and do the incredible is near. Many look up to amazing people, but not everyone, like them, supports him. Some may be jealous and seek revenge, or steal his work, and many will try to harm him. Maya, listening attentively to her mother, thought for a moment she would like everyone to support him. But that couldn't be. It was the same with her. Many envied her beautiful dresses, her special family. She was the only daughter of the village chief. Do people always think that way about those who are more fortunate? Now she understood everything. She muttered something in response. Yuika continued, as her parent, she didn't like to say such things, but since she said so, she was strong and experienced. Therefore, she could do something to protect Ash. The girl, surprised, clarified, "Something?" The woman replied that she could gather people who supported him, and keep away from those who didn't like it, and she could help him in his achievements. Let her show him the back that protects him. Maya, confused, asked again. She would protect Ash, she thought. He knows and can do a lot, and she wants to become mature and reliable. He's like a light shining in the distance. Yuika took her daughter by the shoulders and said it might be hard for her now, but she thinks Ash needs someone like her more than anything else. If she becomes his protector, then she can become the one who gives him strength. Maya, looking at her mother in amazement, replied, "Okay." She agrees to that. Yuika smiled, patted her head, and remarked, "If she says so, she'll succeed. And she'll teach her everything." Maya thought, she'll be by the main character's side and protect him. And even if something happens, she'll always be there for him. Clenching her fist, she exclaimed, "Okay, she'll try. She'll protect Ash." The girl thought about her mother's words, that she'll become the one who gives him strength. She thought, even though she said it, Ash is so smart. He comes up with so many new things, like ointments and beekeeping. She said it out loud. He protected her from Jekyll. She can't protect such an incredible protagonist now. Yuika said her name in surprise. The girl, grabbing the sword, said she needed to try harder. Therefore, she must learn to wield a sword like her father and become stronger. She will defeat all of MC's enemies. Yuika gasped and objected. That's not what she meant. She wanted her to improve people's attitudes towards Ash. Maya replied, "That's later, but first she needs to protect him with a sword." Suddenly she remembered. She had to go to church early today. Then she would go. She shouted to her father that they would train with the sword tomorrow. Yuika shouted after her, "Stop. A sword is good, but she shouldn't forget about communication." Maya thought enthusiastically. Now Ash needn't worry, she will protect him. Meanwhile, Volk and the protagonist were busy deciphering the words. The priests noticed that this letter was repeated often. Since they didn't know the meaning, they should just ignore it. In some sentences, the meaning could be deciphered. But then again, what kind of letter is this? The protagonist chuckled thoughtfully and suggested that perhaps it had multiple meanings, or, if combined with other letters, would it have a different meaning? Volk said, "Multiple meanings, I see. Perhaps that's true, since some sentences don't make sense." "Well, that's clear and understandable," MC said. "If that's the case, it will be difficult to decipher. They don't know how many meanings it has." Volk replied, "That's right." He thought they'd made good progress, but they still had a long way to go. They were already working hard. During this time, he'd managed to read a book on beekeeping, and yet, he hadn't found anything useful for deciphering. This baffled them in their study of the books of an ancient civilization. The protagonist asked, "By the way, can he borrow this?" The priest, handing it to him, remarked with surprise, "He's started beekeeping?" He replied, yes, he'd consulted with Yuika about it. They could start next spring. but for now, he was planning on getting ready. Boke grinned and remarked, "Bye? That's unexpected. Didn't he say he was making aloe vera ointment?" The protagonist said Yuika and some villagers were working on it right now, so everything was fine. He'd only borrowed the book for today, and he needed to hurry. At that moment, Philtania and Maya greeted them. MC noted they were just in time. Philtania said, incredibly embarrassed, "She'll be studying too." After that, she timidly bowed to the priest, greeting him. Boke drawled, "I see. So she'll be joining the training too. She'll be studying beekeeping, but will Ash be teaching her?" The protagonist suggested the girls begin their training. Opening the book, he began to read. So, bees fly around flowers and collect pollen. The radius can be anywhere from 2 to 3. Does this symbol represent distance? Okay, well, that gets the point. Maya thought in surprise. He figured it all out right away. She wouldn't have understood anything. She apologized out loud and said, "They don't understand anything. Can he explain it to them?" He replied, "Okay. Let them forgive him. He was just daydreaming. First, he'll read it to them, and then he'll explain it, okay?" Maya happily agreed. Philtania sheepishly apologized to him for having to teach them. The protagonist assured him, no, he was glad he'd started learning beekeeping. Although there was a huge amount of information, practical experience was needed for a better understanding. If she knew anything about the process or the tools, let her tell them about it. Let her share her knowledge with them. Philtania smiled and said, "Okay." After a while, MC thought about how the three of them had been getting together and studying ever since. Day after day, they intensively studied beekeeping. Thanks to Philtania's parents' work, she absorbed the material more quickly. And when she understood how her parents worked, she became happier. The basic information about this industry was setting up hives, harvesting the bees when the hive was full, and wintering the bees. As autumn approaches, it becomes increasingly difficult for bees to collect pollen and nectar. Don't disturb them or touch them. Bees feed on nectar and pollen. In the spring and summer, when many flowers are blooming, bees work hard to collect a lot of nectar. They fill the hive with it. Beekeeping must be done in the spring. Since it's autumn now, they must prepare for it. Ultimately, it was decided to prepare tools and other materials for the spring work. Items left by Philtania's family helped with preparing the hives and tools. Next, the allies began researching the location of the hives, after which they organized a collection of wild hives and researched the collection method. And so, one day, the protagonist chuckled thoughtfully and said, "So, bees collect nectar. Then it's best to place the hives where there are plenty of flowers. There are plenty of suitable spots in the village." The girls agreed with him. He continued, "The first option is a field near the village. Flowers grow there too, and it would be useful to have bees there. A larger harvest of vegetables and berries could be expected." "What about the forest?" Philtania replied that she thought it was a good idea. Her father placed hives deep in the forest every year, but it was dangerous there, even for men, so her mother never went there. That's why she wasn't allowed to take up beekeeping. The protagonist noted that the forest was dangerous even for an experienced person. It would be better to choose a place near the village. Even if they put the hive in the forest, it would be difficult to find a place. Since he was Ban's apprentice, he could enter the forest. Without experience, it was dangerous there, as he had slipped many times. Without Ban, he wouldn't have managed. By the way, they have a hunter. Maybe he knows a safe place to do beekeeping. He should ask him. Next time, he can talk to him. Philtania asked in surprise, "He knows Ban's brother?" MC replied, "Yes, he's a man of few words, but why did she call him brother?" The girl gasped, smiled and exclaimed, "No, that's not it. He used to come to their house a lot when they were kids." Maya and the protagonist looked at her in surprise. Then he asked Maya, "They were lucky, weren't they?" "She didn't think so?" The girl exclaimed, "That's for sure." Philtania, not understanding what they were talking about, exclaimed, "That's not what they thought." The protagonist replied, "They understood. Have they known him for a long time?" The girl replied, "Yes, but her parents used to talk to him a lot when her father went into the forest. Ban came from a family of hunters." MC exclaimed, "Yes, they also had to go into the forest a lot, so they knew each other. So Ban might know where her father put the hives." The girl agreed. He thought for the sake of her beekeeping. Out loud, he added then, he would like Ban to help them. It would be good if they gathered and discussed everything with him. Maya exclaimed, "Yes, she'd tell her mother that they needed to talk to him about beekeeping." Philtania asked in surprise, "With him? All together? Let them take their time." Her heart was pounding. Thus, Ban and Philtania's first meeting took place in the village chief's house. Yuika said, Since they were meeting, why don't they have dinner? Philtania was nervous at first, but then, incredibly embarrassed, she said she was grateful to him for his work. Although she felt awkward and uncomfortable, she wanted to take up beekeeping like her parents. Therefore, she needed his help. Ban calmly replied, "Okay." Everyone stared at him in surprise. "He's talking," the hunter continued. He remembered where her father placed the beehives. It was the best place in the forest. When he had free time and didn't have to hunt, he wanted to help her. The girl, in a burst of gratitude, thanked him several times. At that moment, Yuika said, "The food is ready." Sometime later, after seeing Ban off, the woman said how well everything had worked out. The protagonist replied, "That's right," he thought. It seemed Ban had long been interested in Philtania himself. Everything was working out well. So, thanks to the hunter, the problem of placing the beehives could be solved. They could safely take up beekeeping, since Ban would help them. They needed to prepare the hives and process them, and he had never heard Ban utter such long-winded expressions. At that moment, Philtania, returning home, thought she was so happy. Now she could practice beekeeping with Ban, and it was also good that Jekyll understood everything. Upon returning, she told her brother that she was home and apologized to him for being so late. The boy replied, okay. He'd already eaten all the wheat porridge there was. She replied, okay. The girl sat down on a chair and fell silent. He asked how the meeting had gone. Philtania replied, they'd discussed a lot. Ban said he'd also take part in their case. He asked in surprise, Ban? She replied, is that so? He remembers him. He's been going to the forest for years, so he knows where their father put the beehives. The girl wanted to add something else, but Jekyll interrupted her and said, well, all right. Philtania said, yes, it would be great if he joined them. The boy abruptly got up from the table and replied, he's going to sleep. The girl thought sadly, oh, her brother. Jekyll, when he lay down on the bed, thought irritably, what the hell? After all, he was so protective of his sister. So, with Ban's support and the bright prospects for beekeeping, the church study group's spirits were revived. The protagonist, looking at the book, thought joyfully, isn't it wonderful that candles can be made from honeycomb? If only they could get it cheaply, they could easily provide themselves with lighting. Until now, such a thing had been a luxury. Honeycomb is beeswax. Apparently, it's a type of wax. Maya dreamily told Philtania she can't wait for the honey. When she collected it, it was incredibly delicious. The girl clarified, did she mean that it was collected from wild honeycombs? If beekeeping goes well and they manage to collect a lot of honey, they could make all sorts of dishes and delicacies. Maya exclaimed enthusiastically, really? Wow, how could it work out? The protagonist said that if they could sell it in town, like aloe vera ointment, then the village's income would increase. Philtania laughingly remarked that she'd have to work hard to become an excellent beekeeper and be a support for the entire village. She pointed to a certain place in the book and asked him if he could explain it to her. MC read that it was crucial to consider the flowering period of pollen plants, or honey plants, temperature changes, and the location of the hive boxes. Okay, that made sense. He thought it would be a good idea to move the hives every season. Philtania noted, by the way, that perhaps her father had done that before. He suggested that the next time they met Ban, they could ask him if he remembered about moving the hives. The girl agreed. Maya mentioned, by the way, has Philtania been going to the forest a lot lately? How is it? It's probably hard, huh? She admitted. Yes, very hard. MC thought about it, deciding that to become a beekeeper, she needed to get used to going to the forest. She had recently started training with Ban. He also goes with them as a small support. He doesn't exactly dislike it, but he doesn't particularly like it either. Ban was very sensitive to the girl, trying to keep her safe in every way. At such moments, the protagonist would turn away, embarrassed. She continued, as she understood the route she was taking wasn't deep or safe at all. Only on the way back, her legs simply fell off. The protagonist noted, and of course, walking in the forest is very exhausting. If she wants to ask about something, she should immediately ask him, or Ban, okay? The girl looked at him in surprise and replied, well, in that case, it really has nothing to do with walking in the forest, but there is something she would like to talk about. She, of course, is embarrassed to ask him about it, and she apologizes in advance. He asked, perplexed, what about? She said, embarrassed about her little brother. MC, surprised, clarified, about Jekyll? The girl continued, he might not want to talk about him, but she had no one else to ask. The protagonist assured her everything was fine. First, let her tell him what was going on. Philtania thanked him and said he hadn't been talking to her much lately. She didn't even know, as if something was weighing on him. As soon as she asked him what was going on, he immediately got angry and ran away. After all, she was like his parents to him. Did he understand her? While she could somehow cope with the role of mother, she was completely incapable of replacing his father. The protagonist drawled, okay. Since she was the only one looking after him, it was entirely possible there were things she might not know. Philtania added that she had completely stopped seeing him playing with his friends lately. She was worried he might be keeping it all inside. MC paused, frankly. He wasn't very good at conveying his desires through emotion, like Jekyll did, rather than logical reasoning. But he still wanted to help her somehow, especially since she really didn't have anyone to turn to given that she had no parents. He said it out loud, I see. If that's the case, we need to try to figure this out. She looked surprised. Seriously? Thank him so much. Only if it wasn't too much trouble. At that moment, Maya whispered to him and asked if she could have him for a minute. And this after what that guy did? He replied that he'd just try to talk to him for now. Okay? Everything would be fine. He thought to himself that Jekyll probably hated him, so he'd need to think about how to approach him. He wondered if he'd listen if he said he wanted to talk to him about his sister. After some time, he came to the field where Jekyll was sitting, called him by name, and said that it was getting dark. Wasn't it time for him to go home? He was very surprised by this, turned sharply to him and asked loudly what he wanted. Did he want to get even with him? He denied it and said that he would like to discuss something with him. He started to walk away from him and said that he had nothing to discuss with him. He asked him not to leave and said that it was important. He wanted to talk about Philtania. Lately, worry has not left her face, no matter what she does. Also, when they are beekeeping, too. Even when she goes to the forest with Ban, walking through the forest, where one careless step can lead to serious injury while deeply thinking about something, is extremely dangerous. He doesn't want anything to happen to his sister, does he? So he wondered if he knew anything that could relieve her of worry. It is for her own safety. He turned to him with a very displeased expression on his face, loudly asked him to shut up, and said that he was the last person he wanted to talk to. Ash was about to say something, but he said loudly in an angry tone that this infuriated him so much. This habit of his of pleasing everyone around him, to please them. In front of Maya, adults, even in front of his sister, he fawns to gain their favor. He shouldn't stick his nose where he's not wanted, pretending to be a good boy. He has no idea what his sister had to endure. He threw him to the ground, grabbed him by the collar, and loudly asked who he even thought he was. Just because he could remember the letters? Or because he made the medicine? Or because he could read a book about beekeeping? Is it because of these trifles that everyone praises him so much? Why does even his sister trust him? After all, he also constantly thought about what he could do for her. After all, he watched her more than anyone. He started crying and asked why he couldn't save her. Why was everything going so well for him? He said that it wasn't like that at all. On the contrary, others were helping him do what he couldn't do alone. Now, he was also unable to solve his sister's problem. He came to him for help. He would understand if he continued to hate him, but he was asking him to help him just this once, for the sake of his sister. Jekyll calmed down. They sat down next to each other and asked, he knows that he doesn't have parents, right? He and his sister worked in the fields together, so they somehow managed to feed themselves. It wasn't luxury, of course, but it was livable. So he thought that even though things weren't easy for them, as long as they had each other, they would cope. However, one day he saw her crying, hugging that book. Then it dawned on him that maybe she had always wanted to take up beekeeping. Worried about him, she gave up what she wanted to do without a word and raised him all this time without complaining. He only caused her trouble when he wanted to be their support. What an idiot he was, but he doesn't understand anything about beekeeping and can't read that book. In the end, all he can do is help her in the field. He doesn't know what else he can help her with. Besides, she's been getting along well with Ban's brother lately, right? So if this continues, they could get married, right? He thinks they could, and that makes him feel lonely? No, that's not the point. His sister has never had anything like this before, and it's probably his fault, because she's always preferred him to herself. Even if he were to talk to her about it, she would probably put it off for some reason, thinking about him. He likes Ban. He knows that he's a good person, although it can be difficult to talk to him. The protagonist said that he is not the most skilled conversationalist. He will agree with this. Jekyll agreed and said that sometimes it is even scary, although it does not matter. In short, he feels like he would trust his sister to him. How can I say it? He wants everything to work out for them, and when it happens, he does not want to stand in their way. He wants her not to worry about him and to get together with him and take up beekeeping. He wants her to be happy. However, even if he leaves home, he has no idea where to go and what to do. So, not knowing what to do, he was not able to talk to her normally. Perhaps this is what worries her. He understood him and asked, so he was looking for a way not to inconvenience her, and that was the reason for his condition, right? He agreed and said that it seemed so. He understood him and asked, so if he had a decent job and somewhere to go, then Fultania would be calm, right? He thought it over, agreed, and he said that he had a great idea. There is one craftsman who really needs an apprentice. He spoke with him personally, so there can be no mistake. He thought that in any case, he once complained about the lack of workers. He even generously shared his secret knowledge with him. He bowed to him and said loudly that he asks to introduce him to this craftsman. He is ready for any work. MC asked, then he will come to him when it is convenient for him and they will discuss everything, okay? He agreed and said that it seems he will not be able to get around him. He asked for forgiveness, and he calmly said that he does not need to worry about such trifles. Jekyll said that he is not talking about that. Just like that time when he got lost because of him. It was probably not easy for him, right? He couldn't even do anything, and he always did everything so well. Everyone admired him. Unable to do anything with him, he began to see him as an enemy. He began to pester him, but despite all this, he didn't tell anyone about it. He bowed to him and said that therefore he was to blame and asked for forgiveness. He extended his hand with a small smile and said that he accepted his apology. Everything is fine. He is not angry with him. He shook his hand and thanked him for it. After some time, he ran after Ash and asked loudly, so the craftsman, is this Brother Ban or something? Couldn't he have said this earlier? Does he even know how scared he was when he suddenly approached him? He continued running and said loudly that he himself agreed before he had a chance to say it. By the way, maybe he should join the church circle too? He would have been a great help to Filton if he had mastered beekeeping. He indignantly asked him to shut up and said that he should at least let him hit him properly. Besides, how could someone like him learn beekeeping? He said that if he studied, he would definitely manage and there was no need to hit him at all. He joyfully thanked him loudly and said that then he should teach him. He loudly said that there was no need for thanks. By the way, how much longer should he run from him? In the end, having become Bond's apprentice, he learned hunting and helped with beekeeping. Filton's problems were solved, and that's the most important thing. After some time, Jekyll called his sister, asked her to be more careful there, and she agreed and thanked him. The protagonist turned to him and asked, He can count on him, right? He agreed with a wide smile and said that he can rely on him. He thought that since he became Ban's apprentice, he put his all into hunting. He was also studying writing, reading, and the basics of beekeeping at church. He also seemed to have apologized to Maya profusely for throwing a rock at her. He also made a special visit to their house to apologize for the disappearance incident. Just as Filtani's beekeeping training was progressing well, Yuke's main business of producing aloe vera ointment was doing well, as he also regularly profited from selling aloe vera ointment. He began purchasing the necessary supplies for his experiments, such as paper, pencils, firewood, and the like, at his own expense. This allowed him to conduct his research more efficiently. His latest results include producing ointment and candles from honeycomb. He has also begun another important study. Winter is coming soon, and for this village, that's the season of death. With the onset of cold weather, the number of sick people in the village increases. However, due to the lack of doctors and the constant shortage of medicine and food, there are many cases in this village where people cannot receive proper treatment, even for a common cold. For this reason, the villagers, unable to eat due to fever, suffer and die from exhaustion. Losing more than one person this winter is common here. With each onset of winter, this does not leave his mind. One day, a boy named Till ran to his house and called him by name. MC opened the door for him and they greeted each other. Shiba came out to greet him too, and he told his mother that he would go for a walk with him. She agreed and said that they should be careful. After that, they spent the whole day outside doing various things. Later, he fell to the ground and said that he was very hot. He sat down next to him and said that it was natural. After all, he ran so much. Their stomachs both growled at the same time, and he said that he was hungry and would like something to eat. He agreed with a sad expression on his face. And Till noticed this, put his hand on his shoulder, and said that everything would be fine. The harvest from the fields would be bigger this time, and they also said prayers to the wolf. His father was also working hard in the fields, right? So they would definitely have enough food. He started coughing badly, which worried Ash, and he asked if he was okay. It was getting chilly. Maybe they could go back early today. He agreed and said that he didn't really want to catch a cold. He stood up and said with a smile that they were done for today, but he would get better soon. Then they would take another walk, okay? He agreed to this. And Till said that he should try not to cry from longing while he waited for this. He agreed, said goodbye to him, and he waved back and ran away. After some time, at home, Shiba came to him, hesitantly called him, and said that she came to talk about Till. He turned to her and asked, "Is he feeling better yet?" He hadn't looked well the other day. He promised that they would play again as soon as he felt better, so he could see him tomorrow. She was struggling to bring herself to tell him something, and he asked, "Was something wrong?" She said that he couldn't play with him anymore because he had recently died. He was shocked by this, and she asked, did he remember that he had a cold? The illness still hadn't gone away. He was about to say something, and she understood him and said that the cold had gotten worse. The fever never went away, and it eventually led to death. She didn't even know how to tell him this, but this could happen in the future, so she needed him to be strong. He asked, why was she saying that? Can't a cold be easily cured now? She denied it, and said that it was not so easy to cure, at least not in this village. The protagonist asked why several times, and after some time in the rain, he went outside and came to the grave. He began to remember everyone who died from diseases and wondered why this life was so dangerous and poor. Why couldn't he save anyone? Shiva ran to him, loudly called his name and asked what he was doing here, especially in such cold. She hugged him, looked at his face and asked if he was okay. With emptiness in his eyes, he said that he was asking for forgiveness for not returning home on time. She hugged him and said that everything was fine. He was always a good boy, such things happen, so everything is okay, everything will be fine. After some time, he thought that in order to at least slightly reduce the number of deaths from colds, he would research antipyretic and analgesic medicine, a decoction of bark similar to willow bark. It is said that it has been used as a medicine since ancient times. It has antipyretic, analgesic, and anti-inflammatory effects. There is little time left before winter. He needs to hurry and test the effect if he wants to use it in practice. After some time, he thought that one day, when his work was nearing completion, he stumbled upon a problem. If you use a decoction of willow bark as a medicine, there is a small chance that, under certain conditions, it can cause a serious reaction. The botanical reference book did not mention these symptoms, and none of the tests he conducted so far showed dangerous side effects. So he did not stop working on it. He was too hasty in finishing the medicine and did not conduct enough preliminary research. He was too careless. He conducted enough tests on the effect of the medicine with Lil Marmot, and no problems arose even when he tried it on himself. However, he would like to avoid using this medicine until he understands what exactly causes the dangerous symptoms. He should look for other possible ingredients. He didn't have time to finish his thought because Shiba ran into the room and loudly announced that terrible news had happened. Maya had come down with a high fever. He was surprised by what he heard, and she said that she was barely conscious and wasn't responding to anyone's words. Her temperature continued to rise unless they did something quickly. He thought that he was sure that this antipyretic would be able to lower her temperature. However, he couldn't check right now what exactly was causing these dangerous symptoms. Besides, he didn't have time to prepare another medicine. There was no time to waste on doubts. He needed to hurry. He remembered the time he spent with her and thought that he had to save her. There was a small chance that this could cause serious symptoms under certain circumstances. What should he do? He couldn't let this happen again. He held in his hands a medicine with enormous potential. A medicine that he didn't have then. He took the jar from the table, ran out of the house, and said loudly that he would be back soon. He was running to the village elder's house. He thought that he was not going to lose her. At the same time, she was lying in bed and thought that she was suffocating. Is she hot or cold? She hates this feeling. Her body is constantly getting heavier and she is scared. She is very afraid and hopes that someone will help. She can't move and breathe. She heard MC ask loudly if she is okay. She opened her eyes, looked at the door, and wondered why he was at her house. She heard voices outside the door and wondered, is he talking with her parents about something? What could it be? He said that he wanted to discuss whether to use this medicine for her or not. She heard this and wondered, did he bring the medicine for her? She sat up, and he said that it had a very strong antipyretic effect, but there was also a rare chance that it would cause side effects. She thought, so what? It helps with the fever, but could it make her worse? Why are they discussing all this? It really sounds like a terrible medicine, but she won't take it. She'll just continue to suffer. It's even worse if this continues. He said that as soon as he heard that she lost consciousness, he knew he had to do something. He sincerely regrets that the safety of this medicine is not guaranteed. However, he wants her to survive. He was about to say something else, but Maya left the room and said that she would take the medicine. Yuika was very worried about this, ran up to her and said that she can't get up, she must rest. She was about to say something about the medicine, but she said that she heard it and there was no need to worry because he made it. She believed that everything would be fine. Besides, she needed to get better soon so she could continue studying and doing things with him. She would accept it, no matter what happened. She was worried about this, turned to Klein and called him. He thought it over and said that if it was Maya's decision, they should respect her choice. He patted her head and asked she should take this medicine and get better soon, okay? She nodded in agreement, and he turned around and asked, that was okay with him, right? Ash agreed and said that then he asked to let him monitor her condition, giving her only tiny doses one at a time. He wanted to do everything as safely as possible. He said that of course, that's what they would do. She called him and said with a smile that she would get better very soon. He agreed and thought that he would pray for the medicine to work. A few days later, he came to the village chief's house and said that he apologized for barging in like this. She said with a happy expression that he could come in. He came up to her bed and asked if she was okay sitting like this. She agreed and said that she had a high fever before, but now, thanks to his medicine, she felt completely fine. He said it was a great relief. He handed her a glass of water and said that she should drink it. She drank it and said that it was delicious. She really liked it. He said that he was glad to hear that. He said that it contained salt and honey. It was also good for the body. He thought that it was some kind of solution for replenishing fluids. She handed him the empty mug, thanked him, and said that it was great. He said that he was glad that she liked it. Now she had better lie down again and rest. She lay down on the bed, covered herself, and asked if he was leaving already. He thought about it and asked if maybe they could talk a little then. He had made great progress in his experiments with the hives. She was surprised by this and asked, what progress have you made? He said that, for starters, he was able to make suppositories and an ointment. However, he needs to do even more in-depth research. For example, what happens if you mix this ointment with aloe? She said it was incredible that he'd already done that. He said it was all thanks to a book on beekeeping. It describes the manufacturing process in great detail. In addition, he's made progress in creating an antipyretic medication. He's found a medicinal plant that seems safer to use than the willow bark medicine he recently gave her. He's now conducting trials with it. She said with surprise that she didn't even know such a plant existed. He wanted to say something else and clenched his fists tightly. He lowered his head, called her, and said that he owed her an apology for what he had done. Due to his lack of preparation, he allowed her to take an unsafe medicine. If he had considered all the risks earlier, he would have been able to give her something safer. She was surprised by this, asked him to wait, and said that he had absolutely nothing to apologize for. If it weren't for him and his medicine, she would still be sick. So really, she should thank him. He should tell her how the trials of his new antipyretic are going. The protagonist agreed and said that everything was going smoothly. It seemed he would be able to start using it before winter. Moreover, he discussed this with Miss Yuika, and this winter, she plans to store supplies of fever reducers and healthy food in the village chief's house, and then distribute them to everyone who gets sick. This will help reduce the burden on the villagers. Preparing enough food and medicine for each house is a very difficult and rather expensive task. Therefore, if the lady stores all of this here, it will be much easier for the villagers to get food and medicine, and they won't have to wait for Mr. Kato to come by to sell something. She understood him and said that if it was possible to come directly to their houses and take the medicine with the food, then those who have a cold will not have to worry as much as usual. He agreed and said that this was precisely the point That is why he must concentrate all his efforts on producing this fever reducer so that every villager gets the medicine. He should not linger too long. She has not yet fully recovered her strength, so he asks her not to overexert herself into rest. Maya agreed, and he said, by the way, about the ointment made from bee products. He would be grateful if she helped him test it soon. Could he count on her? She agreed with a happy expression, and he thanked her and said that, however, first she needed to focus on getting better. She agreed and said that she would try to get rid of this cold as soon as possible. After that, he left the house and told Yuika that he apologized for being so late. She thanked him for helping her daughter and said that he didn't need to worry about it. He said that he had conducted enough tests with the medicine, so he would deliver it to them as soon as possible. She agreed and said that she would be grateful. This winter, they will have his medicine, and thanks to Ban and Jekyll, the village now has more food supplies. Besides, with the income from the aloe ointment, they have extra money. It is thanks to him that they will be able to get through this winter fully prepared. On behalf of the village chief's house, she expresses her sincere gratitude to him. MC refused and said that he should thank her and the villagers who helped him. She said that they had always prepared for people to die in winter, but something told her that they would not lose anyone this year. He agreed and said that he would do everything to make sure that this was the case. They would survive this winter and greet the spring with healthy residents. After that, he walked along the path and thought about what the lady had said, fully prepared. However, he gave Miss Maya a potentially dangerous medicine, and in the end, even after rereading the books in the church, he could not find any information about those severe symptoms. There is a limit to what he can do in this village, and he does not only mean medicine. He is sure that he will soon face other obstacles. The life he dreams of is still very far away. Perhaps there are even more books in the capital that he can read. With that in mind, he'll have to leave the village sooner or later. Come to think of it, he knows next to nothing about those parts. For now, he'll continue working with what he has here and simultaneously consider his future options. He went home, warned them about it, and Tobito immediately called him loudly. He slammed his mug on the table and loudly asked how much longer he'll sit over his books. He should stop doing this stupid nonsense and go work in the fields like everyone else. A little earlier, he thought that if he was born into a peasant family, then a real man should work hard in the fields, work energetically in the fields, laugh cheerfully, demonstrate a masculine presence. Then people will respect him, and he'll be able to adequately support his family. However, Ash doesn't help in the fields. He just reads books all the time. No matter how many times he scolds him that reading books won't make the field any better, he not only doesn't stop reading, but on the contrary, he reads even more. He also imperceptibly drew in even the village headman's family, starting to study medicine, beekeeping, everything except for the field. He understands that this is great. He is unable to cope with his studies, and Shiba laughs and says, their wonderful son. He is also proud of his son, who is praised by the whole village. Earlier, he was sitting in the company of men with alcohol and said that, however, it still seems that he should go out into the fields more. If he is a man from a peasant family, the fields are more important than studies, right? They asked. Maybe this is so, but he helps in the fields as much as he should, right? It seems like he is not slacking off. What serious problems does he have? An overly capable son. Really? Maybe he is not his child at all? He got very angry about this, stood up abruptly and loudly asked what he just said. The guy who said this apologized for this joke. They poured him alcohol and said that Shiba is loyal only to him. No one will take this seriously. He drank a whole mug and loudly asked for more. Later, he returned home and she sighed with displeasure and asked how much he had drunk. He said that he couldn't help himself. He was in such a mood. She left the room, asked him to go to bed early, and said that she still had chores to do around the house. He looked around and thought that he had gone somewhere again. When he returned, he needed to have a proper talk with him. As soon as the protagonist returned home, he loudly asked him to sit next to him. He said in a serious tone that he should listen. A man should work in the field. He agreed and asked, field work is a man's job, right? The knowledge he gained from books, managing work processes, and the state of growth in the fields made fieldwork a little easier, didn't it? Tobito slammed his fist on the table, loudly called him an idiot, and said that the more work you put into the field, he asked with a calm expression. What more work, the better the harvest, right? His notes about the field, this is also serious work. For a good harvest, you need to carefully observe the field. He lowered his head and asked why he was so smart. He thought he understood everything. In fact, he is not a good husband and father. He cannot be a real father at all, but he is a really wonderful child. He is much smarter than him and cares for Shiba. Someone like him does not need his lectures. He remembered the conversation with the men that happened earlier, raised his head and asked, is he really his son? He sighed and asked, what is he saying? No matter how you look at it, he is his son. If they were not related, he would not have understood the words of such a drunk father so well. He asked, is that really so? MC agreed and said that he grew up looking at his back. True, the back of a man who has drunk too much does not look particularly dignified, which worries him. He was surprised by what he heard, lowered his head and thought what it meant. He carefully watched even the back of such a worthless father. He began to cry and thought, what a wonderful son he is. He fell asleep. Sheba entered the room and said that she was grateful to him for listening to his father. He worries about him in his own way. Also, when someone praises him, he becomes very pleased. The fact that she told him this, he must keep it a secret from him, okay? Sometime later, when spring came, he thought that every year at this time there is a festival to welcome spring, before they really start tending the fields. This is an event when the whole village gathers strength. This year it is especially large scale. This is because all the villagers survived the winter together and greeted the spring without losses. This is very good. Debito approached him and said that this year the fun is in full swing. Those people are already having a great time. He looked at him and asked if he doesn't drink so much this year. Usually he was with those men. He agreed and said that he is no longer young. As a parent, he should be reasonable, shouldn't he? Ash smiled at this and said, what a worthy father. He's proud of him as a son. It seems good. If he drinks in moderation, his health should improve. He's still too weak, so he's glad to have a reliable father. He laughed loudly and said that was natural. He wouldn't give in to him. He could rely on him in anything. After all, he was his father. This caught his attention, and he said that he had one favor to ask of him. Mrs. Fultania was planning to take up beekeeping, and the field near her house was likely to become free, right? He agreed and said that not long ago they had just been discussing how to divide up the care of that field. He asked if he could assign that field to them. He had an experiment he wanted to conduct. Debito agreed to this, and he said that of course he would work to cover the extra workload. He shook his head in refusal and said that he didn't need to think about such unnecessary things. He could look after her field just fine on his own. He looked at him with admiration and said that he could be relied upon. After some time, in the field that his father had taken over, he had already started a new experiment. He and Maya were sitting in that field. She pointed at the book and said that then they would finish here, and then, probably this. He agreed and said that he was very grateful for the help with the experiment. She said cheerfully that it was a given. After all, he had helped her when she was sick. Besides, it was an important experiment, wasn't it? He agreed and said that if it worked, it seemed the field harvest would increase. He thought that this was an experiment he couldn't conduct due to the lack of field space, but thanks to his father, he would finally be able to. He turned to her and said that, by the way, honeycomb ointment also helps well. She agreed and said that her skin was smooth. Such a good feeling. He said that there didn't seem to be any problems with the effectiveness. It would be nice if beekeeping also became successful when the honeycombs began to be collected reliably. She agreed and said that it would be great if beekeeping succeeded. After all, Mrs. Fultania had tried so hard. The protagonist said that now was the most important time for beekeeping. The preparation was varied, but in reality, there were many difficulties. She asked, even though she had read and studied so many books, it wasn't easy. Right? He said that this could only be understood by trying it in practice. Maybe he should come and have a look later too? She said that she wanted to come too then, and if he needed any help, he could just say so. He said that he was grateful for her participation, but she already helps him a lot, which made him feel awkward. She asked if he didn't think he helped them much more. Mom said the same thing. Aloe ointment, beekeeping, fever-reducing medicine, he did so much. Thanks to him, the village has improved so much. He said that he couldn't do anything alone. It was they who were helping him. He thought that he understood that his actions benefited the whole village. But ultimately, they were actions for his personal dream. If you dig deeper, it was his selfishness, which is why he should be grateful to the people who help him. Otherwise, he would become arrogant and fail through his own fault. He said that that's why he was grateful to her for her constant help. She blushed from embarrassment and said that she hadn't done anything special. She would also try not to give in to him. He said with a smile that then he too should try to be worthy of her goal. After all, there was still so much he wanted to do to make life even better. They heard a loud noise, stood up abruptly, and he said that it was a danger bell. A crowd of villagers ran past them, and he loudly asked what had happened. One of them noticed them and loudly said that they should also run faster, because it was dangerous to stay here. The bear descended into the village. They were surprised because of this, and he thought that the bear was omnivorous, eating both animals and plants. There is a belief that, having learned the taste of a person, a bear will feed only on people. If someone in the village is attacked, bad things will happen. However, who can drive away the bear? The village head, who knows how to handle a sword, went to the county capital and is now absent. Ban and Jekyll, who have hunting experience, have only been in the forest for a few days and will probably not return to the village for several more days. That is, now in this village, only he, with his hunting skills and equipment, can cope with the bear. MC called Maya and said that she should go with the others to the church and take refuge there. He had some small business. He would go home for a minute and then return. She was surprised by this and said that then she would go too, because it was dangerous to go alone. He refused and said that first she should go to the church and report that he went home. There would be a problem if they thought he was missing. She, with a worried look, said that however when the bell rings, everyone needs to gather in the church. He also needs to run there. He said that everything is fine. He will also come soon. He took her by the shoulders and said that her task is to report this to the church. She became embarrassed because of this, thought about it, nodded, and said loudly that he would definitely have to return. He quickly ran home and thought that it looked like his father and mother had already evacuated to the church. He needed to hurry. He took 2 spears and a bow set and thought that there should be small hunting tools in the pockets of the bag. If suddenly a bear came close to the church, he would be able to drive it away with this somehow. He ran to the church, but on his way he met a bear that had attacked the village. He looked at it with a tense expression and thought that this was the period after hibernation. Still, his goal was food. The animal turned around and their eyes met. He became worried about this and thought that he was going to eat. He must not be allowed to approach the church. He said, "Welcome to this village. What is the purpose of his visit?" The bear growled loudly, and he said that he should not be so aggressive. If he was hungry, he could give him some food. He began to look around, and he thought that he was very careful, checking if there were other enemies besides him. He asked, "How about it?" He will do nothing, satisfy his hunger a little, and return to the forest. It seems that this way they will both be satisfied. He raised his head and growled even louder. He was nervous about this and wondered if he could handle it. He said that it seemed like he was not going to leave peacefully. Then he was not going to calmly watch him destroy this village. He thought that this was his village, embodied like an ideal fairy tale. Based on the hope he gained from books, it was still far from ideal. Compared to a book, this was just the first or second page of his fairy tale. He said that if he intended to destroy this, then he declared undoubtedly that they became enemies. The bear ran towards him, and he stuck his spear into the ground and thought that it could wait. He took the bow in his hands, began to aim, and said that they needed to keep their distance. He shot, but the arrow just bounced off his head. The bear ran towards him very quickly, and he was very surprised by this. He swung his paw, and Ash stepped to the side, and the beast's blow broke his bow and quiver with arrows. He worriedly wondered if there was some way. A small bottle rolled to his hand, and he thought, right, he has poison. He quickly ran to the spears, took one, doused the blade with poison, and thought that it was the paralytic hunting poison that Ban gave him. He had to stop the beast's movements. The bear ran towards him, swung its paw, but he lunged forward and dodged this attack. He turned sharply, swung the spear, and managed to stick it. However, this beast turned sharply, broke his spear, and swung its paw to attack. He was surprised by this, raised his hands in front of his head, and received a severe wound. There were claw marks on his hand. He looked at the beast and thought that the poison had started to work. He began to bandage his hand and thought that he needed to stop the bleeding immediately. The bear walked towards him, and he thought that it would take a few more minutes for the poison to fully take effect. Would he be able to hold out? He said that they were both without right arms and there was a time limit. What would they do? Maybe they would declare a draw here? The bear ran towards him, and he thought that it had no intention of retreating. He threw the broken spear at the animal's head and hit it in the eyes. Taking advantage of the bear's confusion, he ran to the second spear, took it in his hand, and thought that he too would not be able to hold out for long. He got into a fighting stance with a serious expression and thought that he would meet it with this blow, and this time he would not run away. When the bear ran towards him, he gritted his teeth and thought that this was undeniably scary. It was a risky bet, but the bear should be afraid too. After all, he was throwing himself onto the spear, which threatened him with mortal danger. This was a test of courage. Brave Mr. Bear. Living in the wild, he may have experienced serious injuries. He may have been driven to the brink of death. But there's one experience he definitely doesn't have, the experience of true death, right? That sensation, vividly imprinted in the vague memories of a past life, the last beat of the heart, fading vision, the pure sound of the wind, unmuffled by the sounds inside the body. One by one, the particles of consciousness disappear. He, who has known this horror of death, can resist the fear of death. The bear saw the blade of a spear pointed at him and trembled with fear. He noticed this, stabbed with a spear, and loudly said that he lost to fear. He pierced this beast, but suddenly it leaned towards him to bite his head. The bear fell to the ground and broke the spear in his hands. He was breathing heavily due to fatigue, sat on the ground, and said that he had won. He grabbed his wounded hand and thought that the problem was that he didn't know if he could survive after this. The blood didn't stop, but he needed to stop the bleeding. He began to lose consciousness and thought that he couldn't allow himself to die in such a place. He would definitely be able to survive. He can't die yet. There are so many things he wants to do while he's alive. At the same time, Maya, with a worried look, thought that he still hasn't arrived. He should hurry. DeVito approached her, called out to her, and asked if his son hadn't come with her. She looked worried, saying that he'd said he wanted to go home first and then come straight here. They heard a very loud sound, became worried, and loudly asked what that just was. Maybe a bear was getting close? She ran to the door, loudly asked for it to be opened, and said that he hadn't arrived yet. The guy said that was bad. He'd go and see what was there, and she should stay here. She didn't listen, ran out of the church, and the guy loudly asked her to wait. She ran to the battlefield, saw the wounded protagonist lying on the ground, and became very worried. His parents saw this, ran to him, and Tobito loudly asked if he was okay. He lay with his eyes closed and breathing heavily, and they asked him to hold on. Shiba called Lady Yuika and asked what they should do. She asked with a confused look, "You need help, right? First you need to stop the bleeding." "Wait, has he already stopped the bleeding himself? But the blood is still flowing. If only Klein were here." Maya looked at what was happening in horror and wondered why this had happened. They had just been together in the field and were talking happily. That's not true, is it? People nearby asked if he could survive with a wound like that. What the hell? That's impossible. What should she do with an injury like that? Is it even possible to help? It seems difficult. It's scary even to look at. He'll lose his arm. There's no chance at all. She became even more worried about this and wondered what to do. If this continues, he will die. She doesn't want this, because they won't be able to talk anymore. They won't be able to study together. But what should she do? She remembered how he had said earlier that they first need to move him from the dirty place on the street to a clean house and provide assistance. Then prepare the cleanest cloth and ointment possible. Well, water is not suitable for washing wounds. You need to boil it first. When there's a lot of blood, like this, with a cloth or rope to stop the bleeding. She thought that for sure. He taught her everything she needed to do. She remembered everything. When she had a fever, he came to her aid. Now it's her turn. She said loudly that they should all listen to her. They would immediately give him first aid. They should carry him to her house. They need hot water. Whoever lives near her house, boil some water and bring it. Filtania called her and said loudly that she would also help with the treatment. Brother Ban taught her for hiking in the forest. Folks said that he brought a book that he read like a medical reference. It probably says how to provide assistance. She turned to them and called out their names in surprise. And Yuika said that if there was anyone who could help, she asked them to help her daughter. She walked up to her, took her by the shoulders, and said that she should hurry and go save him. She would also come as soon as she warned the people remaining in the church. Maya ran to her house and said loudly that they should all go to her house quickly. She thought with a determined expression that she would definitely save him. They treated his wound and continued to take care of him while he was unconscious. After some time, Filtania said that it seemed like it would be good. Volk was reading a book and said that the fever seemed to have subsided. There was an improvement, as it seemed to him. Shiba turned to them and said that she was grateful to them today as well. They said that he would still read other volumes. If he finds anything, he would look here. She would also return home. If there was anything she could help with, they could call her. They left. She looked at him with a worried look, and Maya entered the room, calling her. She said that she brought a towel, and there were also extra bandages. She should use them. She sat down next to her, and Shiba said that she shouldn't overexert herself. If she wanted, she could rest. She refused and said that everything was fine. After all, it was for him. Now she needed to boil some water and reread those books again. She looked at her, called her by name, and said that her son was born in winter, on a cold night when it was snowing. She remembered that day. Tobito picked up MC, handed him over and said, "This is Mom." She laughed, asked him to be quiet, and said that what a healthy child they had. However, of all the days, he had to be born on such a cold one. He agreed and said that the sun set quickly, so it was hard to bathe him in the dark. The village headman brought candles. It helped a lot. She agreed and said that she would have to thank him. When MC fell asleep, he took him in his arms, put him in the crib, and stroked his head. He asked if they needed to think of a name, but it was still too early, don't you think? She said with a smile that they should think of something, since this child was born safely. He asked in a thoughtful tone, what name would be suitable? Of course, you need to choose something happy so that he grows up healthy. She asked, since he was born on a cold night, how about a name so that he does not know the need for warmth and light? He said that was an excellent idea. She was as insightful as always. They started discussing it until the morning. Shiba noticed this and said that the night was already ending. He got up from his chair and said that it looked like it. They should have breakfast first. They had soup. He wanted to feed her when he woke up. He covered yesterday's coal with ash. The word ash caught her attention, and she suggested it as a name. He called the name Ash Modest and asked, would that do? She said that although it was modest, it sounded like a name that would protect. The fate of this child may not be as merciful as spring or autumn. They are in the wilderness. It seems there are enough trials and tribulations. For this child, ash, which can survive a long, harsh night and preserve the fire, is an extremely auspicious symbol. To guard and protect the hot coals, with such a wish they will name him that. What will he say? Tobito thought about it and asked, perhaps without ash one cannot preserve the smoldering coals, right? He agreed. That will be their child's name from now on. After that, she approached his crib with a small smile and wished him to grow up healthy. Shiba said she suddenly remembered that moment. She thanked her for listening. The girl replied that long ago, there lived a deity bird, and this bird never died. It was an immortal bird. When it was injured or grew old, it would prepare cinnamon branches, light a magical fire, and burn itself. And after the magical fire burned out, it would rise from the resulting ashes, emerging from its depths even stronger than before the burning. Ash, that's such a powerful name. so everything will definitely be fine. Even if it gets injured, if it's treated properly, everything will definitely be fine, she thought. Ash had taught her so much about wound care, and Philtania and Folk too. Everyone had helped her so much. She had read books, they had checked everything over and over again. She had helped, but so many days had passed, and Ash still hadn't woken up. She had helped, but what if something was wrong? What if she had made a mistake? She thought she would save him, but no, it's not that day. If she and Ash had run away together, then he wouldn't have suffered, and because of her, Ash suffered. Let her forgive her. It's all her fault. Sheba hugged her and said that it wasn't her fault. Everything was okay. Everything would be okay. Maya tried so hard for Ash, he would definitely wake up. She was sure he would wake up. The girl hysterically exclaimed that if it remained like this, she still wanted to tell Ash so much. She didn't want him to die. She's so sorry. Suddenly, at that moment, the protagonist woke up. Sheba, in complete shock, jumped up from her seat and said she'd call his dad right away. He looked at Maya and called out to her. She noted that she had been very scared because he still hadn't woken up. She thought that she might not be able to talk to him anymore. The protagonist smiled and replied that they would be able to talk. Maya burst into tears and exclaimed that she felt so good. After a while, MC reflected that even after he'd woken up, he'd been strictly ordered not to leave his bedroom for a while. It was a busy agricultural season, and he was worried about the progress in the experimental field and beekeeping. But everyone kept telling him the same thing. He needed to rest. When he told Volk, who'd visited him, about this, the guy said it was because he always started acting strange the moment they took their eyes off him. The protagonist remarked that they were treating him like a problem child. Volk laughed and exclaimed, "I'm glad he understands that. He knew him. He was bored, right? That went without saying. Let him consider himself in his debt. When he recovers, he'll primarily help him with the decryption." Perplexed, the protagonist replied that he had other things to do. The guy pointed out that he'd already said it was a favor. After that, he thought about whether he was currently spending his time relaxing and diligently reading books. Frankly, he was grateful for it. Even though this had happened, he would be a burden to the village chief for a while. He thought he should at least apologize, but instead, they expressed gratitude. Moreover, they were so willing to take care of him. He even felt awkward. MC took out the book and with a smile, thought that he had really enjoyed the story. The herbal tea recipe mentioned in the story was also interesting. He would pick up this book next. He was enjoying his time reading. But for the next step toward improving his life, after reading almost all the practical books in the church, he came to the conclusion that it was difficult to do anything else in this village. For example, a book on agriculture. It mentioned a method for making fertilizer, but using the so-called high pressure and temperature method, a certain substance was created. And if this is forced into a chemical reaction with something else, it produces nitrogen, which is important as a component of fertilizer. A barrage of incomprehensible terms. He can't make sense of it. And even if he wants to learn chemistry, there are no books explaining it. Through a priest, Volk contacted the temple in the capital of the domain and asked them to look for chemistry books. But even that is difficult. As for bacteria and viruses, the level of civilization is such that there is only an idea. Like, in ancient times there were such ideas. It's not surprising that everything is difficult. Moreover, they lack equipment. The fire in the hearth is weak and difficult to regulate. There are no laboratory glassware resistant to chemical changes. Moreover, this is an environment where even temperature measurement is impossible. Chemical experiments are definitely impossible. Even with fertilizer alone, things are not so simple, and increasing food production is an imperative task. The situation is a bit of a dead end now. In the future, they need to think about how to obtain what is not available in this village. At that moment, Yuika entered the room and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist, smiling, put the book back on the shelf and replied that, thanks to it, he had recovered enough to enjoy reading. She said that was very good. Then could they talk a little? This winter, she plans to send Maya to her parents' house in the capital to study. MC noted that connections are very important, and it's important to get to know society outside the village. Yuika agreed, adding that Maya had only just become truly intelligent, thanks to the many lessons Ash taught her. He replied that it was her own effort and willpower that had brought her this. He had only helped when she asked. The woman said that even if he thought so, as the mother of this child, and as a member of the village chief's family, she was very grateful to him. He should accept her sincere gratitude. MC, smiling, said that hearing such a thing from the mistress herself was truly a great honor. He gratefully accepted it. He thought it was nice when someone he respected said that. Even if he lived selfishly for his own dreams, receiving gratitude from others was very pleasant. Yuika said that, therefore, he should allow them to always be grateful in the future. The protagonist smiled and replied that they had defeated him. If they told him that, then he couldn't do what he wanted without caring about inconveniences for others. Wasn't that right? The woman said that if he thought so, then she had won. He reflected that he hadn't originally intended to mindlessly harm others, but at some point, emotions can overwhelm and lead to choices that don't align with others. So, as a precaution, they drove an emotional wedge. That's what it meant. Even though they put a limiter on him to prevent him from going wild, For some reason, he didn't feel bad about it. He considered himself a neglected case. Yuika smiled and said that they had enough of taming Ash. They would return to the conversation about Maya. She had a small suggestion. Wouldn't he like to go to the capital of the domain with her? MC exclaimed without hesitation that he would. He excitedly asked when the departure time was. He'd heard there was a temple in the capital, incomparable in size to a village church. There were a lot of books there, right? He needed to read them all quickly. Besides, the capital was a hub for buying goods from the surrounding villages and towns, right? That meant he could obtain various items, knowledge, and technology. He'd be able to conduct experiments he couldn't before. Yuika smiled and said that he was as usual. The protagonist replied that he was still inexperienced. He was just being a little honest with himself. She pointed out that she had prepared all sorts of persuasive words. It wasn't like the royal capital, of course, but it was geographically and socially much closer to the royal capital, and so on. MC happily exclaimed that that was also appealing. They couldn't delay. He needed to get ready faster. Yuika smiled and told him to calm down a bit. He apologized, adding that he'd gotten a little heated. So when does the departure take place? Maya is leaving in the winter, right? The woman agreed and added that she wanted him to adjust to it. So until then, he needed to talk to his parents and hand over his work. There was a lot to prepare, right? She thought he wouldn't be returning to the village for a while. MC agreed and thought about it. He needed to give up the work he was currently doing with someone. For example, he'd have to give up beekeeping, and his own research would also need to be temporarily halted, and he wouldn't be able to see everyone in the village for a while. Yuika wondered if he should stay after all. The protagonist thought that if he stayed in this village, it would be difficult for him to do anything new. Besides, studying in the capital of the domain was definitely a great turning point. It would surely be a big step toward a rich life. Then all he could do was move on. He said he would go, and she should let him go. She was right. Preparation was necessary. He needed to inform everyone in the village in advance that he would be gone from the winter. Then, you need to create documents for the transfer of cases. It's best to have as many people as possible who can read. Invite those who want to participate in the training sessions. He also urgently needs to advance the experimental field. He also wants to summarize the research results. Looks like he's got quite a bit of work ahead of him. Yuika noted with a smile that he looked so happy at times like these that it was almost unsettling. Let his wounds heal first, okay? MC agreed and added that he'd start by doing everything he could while lying in bed. After some time, he came to Volk and told him everything. The priest asked if he'd be going to the domain capital. The protagonist happily agreed and added that, with the recommendation of the chieftain's family, he could study there. They said they'd even cover his living expenses. The boy asked, "So for quite a long time?" He agreed and noted that the training generally lasts 2 years. He thought he'd be able to return to the village during his studies, but he wasn't sure yet how things would work out. In any case, now he'd be able to thoroughly read books in the capital. Perhaps he'd be able to accomplish much more right away. His injuries have mostly healed, and he's now preparing for his trip to the capital of the domain. Volk noted that he's always busy with one thing after another, so it's impossible to take your eyes off such a restless guy. The protagonist asked if he could be a little more concerned about his beloved first disciple. The priest laughed and exclaimed, "Don't talk nonsense." He'd said before that he wasn't the type to die so easily. MC, perplexed, noted that in fact, this time he almost died. He exclaimed, "No." Seeing him with a high fever and delirium, he was even more convinced. Does he even remember? What does he think he was muttering in his delirium? He definitely won't die from this. He will definitely live. He kept whispering that. After that, even the god of death who came for him would definitely give up and leave. The protagonist sheepishly said that he shouldn't laugh like that. He was trying his best. After all, he had things to do. Volk agreed and noted that there was nothing he could do then. He couldn't help it, right? He agreed with a smile and said they needed to continue deciphering. If he sent letters after his departure to the capital of the domain, he would continue working on it. The priest replied that they would do so. It would be perfect for killing time when he reached a dead end. He rose from his chair, placed his hand on Volk's head, and told him to try his luck there. MC, surprised, asked where he was going. Volk replied that he had gone for a walk. Sometimes, you can. He wondered, perplexed. A reclusive priest going for a walk? What the hell had happened? The boy waved and remarked that they would try deciphering another time. The protagonist smiled and thought, let him try his luck too. After a while, he reflected that ever since the decision had been made about studying, he had been busy handing over responsibilities and completing his research. The seasons flew by. Then came the day of departure. MC thought that today his life in this village was coming to an end. He would say one last prayer. In the cemetery, he folded his hands and began to chant that his loved ones, at the call of the wolf god, would escape their torment. Guided by the monkey god, they would find harmony, and under the protection of the dragon god, they would rest in peace. The protagonist reflected on how many times he had despaired with each new tombstone. Just from a cold, just from a broken bone, just from a toothache. How poor this world is. How fragile this world is. Why can't he save anyone? One mistake, and he would have been engraved on this tombstone and turned to dust. Only a tiny difference in luck separated him from them. Does this mean that the role of the living, those lucky enough to be buried in their ashes? If he's alive, he must rise from the ashes and sow seeds in them. He had to think like that. How poor this world is, so he had to do something. Yes, he mustn't despair, but first light a spark of determination. This is the third winter since he learned his letters and started reading books after that reading aloud. This year, he'll be 11 years old. Today, he's leaving this village, so he wants to tell them that from now on, he vows to give it his all. They'll go to the domain capital to rekindle his dreams. After some time, MC and Maya boarded a carriage and set off. He thanked Kato for agreeing to give them a ride. The boy replied that there was nothing to thank him for. He was going on business anyway. The protagonist smiled and said that he was very interested in the domain capital. The girl smiled and remarked how good it was that he was with her. It would be scary to go to school alone. Upon arrival, she would need to greet the master. He replied that greeting her might be nerve-wracking, but he would assist her. Besides, the cityscapes were undoubtedly refreshing. It felt like hours had passed since they left the village. But the capital was still far away? Kato pointed and replied that they would be there very soon. MC looked in the right direction and was surprised by the sight of enormous defensive walls. He wondered if they were stone walls. The layout of the city was hilly. The fact that the stone walls were warped in places was because repairs after battle damage were urgent, and there was a ballista there, right? Apparently, there was no black powder or muzzle-loading cannons. So, despite the need for high defense, all defense relied solely on physical force. The protagonist said they wouldn't know until they saw it with their own eyes. They were moving forward into this city, which still looked precarious. After some time, they arrived in the capital of the domain itself, Itutsu. Seeing the vast, spacious square and the crowds, they were quite surprised. MC began to look around and thought, everywhere he looked, there were only one-story buildings, and all of them wooden? He couldn't see any stone or brick. Since this was the capital of the domain, he expected a more developed appearance. Could this city really be further from his desired standard of living than he thought? The situation was extremely unfavorable, but he had known this since his time in the village. He simply needed to do it himself. From now on, he would strive with the spirit and tenacity capable of completely transforming this city. To do this, he needed to make the most of this learning opportunity. MC noted that they should first greet the local ruler. Kato agreed, pointed to a large building, and said that's why they would head there. After that, they arrived at the king's mansion and sat down on the sofas in the room. The protagonist, looking out the window, reflected that after all, there were only a few stone buildings along the way. Considering the city walls were still warped, perhaps there was a shortage of stone? He thoughtfully suggested that perhaps there was a reason. This city was for them. They'd only been here a few minutes, but there was plenty of intrigue. Maya tensed up greatly and agreed with him. MC, seeing this, wondered if she was so tense she felt like she was about to turn to stone. Well, he couldn't blame her. Meeting a big shot in a luxurious hall like this would have made anyone nervous. He asked if she was okay. The girl replied nervously, not knowing if she could greet properly. She'd been training with her mother, but still. The protagonist assured her that she would meet Lady Yuika's brother. He was her uncle. He'd probably be kind. Everything would be fine. He was here too, so he suggested they work together. Maya felt motivated and agreed. Kato, sitting across from them, remarked that they were both quite important figures. The protagonist asked if he seemed tense too. The man replied that he had experience thanks to him. The wholesale buyer of aloe vera ointment is mostly here. MC wondered what Lady Yuika had been saying since the sales began, to the home in the capital of the domain. At that moment, a maid entered the room and warned them that Itsuki Amanobe Sakura, the acting ruler, would be receiving them. Were they ready for the meeting? Maya replied that they were. The girl immediately opened the door, and the boy himself, Yuika's younger brother and the acting ruler of Margrave Sakura's domain, entered. He introduced himself with a smile and said that he was greeting them in place of the ruler, who was currently absent. MC reflected that the capital of the Sodra kingdom was far from Margrave Sakura's domain. Apparently, the lord currently resided in the kingdom's capital, and his son, Itsuki, rules this land as lord in his stead. Yuika casually said, home, so he didn't pay attention. But it turns out she's from the ruling family. They have an impressive pedigree. Maya rose from the sofa and said with a smile that she thanked him for spending his precious time with them. Instead of the village chief, she had come to deliver the annual greeting. The girl handed him a document and noted that it was a report from the village chief, Klein, on the village's management for the year. She asked him to accept it. Itsuki took the document and replied that he thanked her for her efforts. Then he chuckled and exclaimed that this was not appropriate. Let her forgive him. The report and greetings from the village are finished. Now they can relax a little. Would they mind? They hadn't seen her in a long time. Although the last time they met was when she was born, she probably doesn't remember him. Maya, slightly perplexed, agreed. Itsuki noted with a smile that she had grown so much and had become beautiful. just like his older sister. The greeting was dignified, but it contained the seriousness characteristic of Klein's brother-in-law. The older sister and brother-in-law still get along? Maya smiled and agreed. The boy exclaimed joyfully, as he expected. The dream of every couple lives on. He had been looking forward to her studies, wanting to see with his own eyes how his older sister's child had grown. The girl replied that she was flattered that he had allowed them to study here. She thanked her uncle from the bottom of her heart. Itsuki was completely shocked and said that it was too unexpected. If possible, not in public. That is, if she continued to call him that. He calmed down a bit and apologized then, looking at the protagonist, noted that he had met Kato many times, but this was his first time with him. He bowed his head, apologized for the late introduction, introduced himself, and added that he intended to repay this favor with diligent training and results. He could find no words to express his gratitude for giving a peasant like himself the opportunity to study. Itsuki remarked that it now became clear to him why his older sister and brother-in-law had recommended him so highly. He apologized for the indiscretion, but he didn't look like a peasant's child. Kato replied that Ash was special. The ruler smiled and said that this time there was a warriors' meeting, which he was looking forward to. His younger brother, a year younger than Maya, would also be there. He asked that they become friends with him. The girl asked if this was Lord Arthur, correct? Itsuki replied that she shouldn't call him Lord. Let her treat him like an ordinary peer and friend. That's what he wants. The Warriors' Assembly is both a place for young apprentices to be trained by influential figures in the capital and a place for socializing. It's also a place for networking, so it's difficult to completely shed status and background, but it's a rare opportunity to find friends your own age. The protagonist noted that the higher one's status as a statesman, the more valuable a person can be trusted. Itsuki agreed admiringly, adding that he was quite intelligent. He smiled and said that in that case, he would be delighted. He was just a peasant, nothing more. He had no business connections in the city, and his status was insignificant. If he could speak with his younger brother, he would be grateful. The ruler exclaimed admiringly that he had a noble spirit. He had expected much, since his sister and brother-in-law recommended him. But, at that moment, the maid warned that the time had come. Itsuki began asking her to stay with his niece a little longer, explaining that he would be working double time later and that he hadn't seen her in a while. The maid merely apologized, implying that they couldn't put it off any longer. The lord apologized for leaving and thanked Kato for bringing them. The man replied with a smile that it was on the way, and he had received his full payment. But even without that, he would have gladly helped. Izuki began to leave, saying that he had prepared a place for them to stay. They should wait there until the guide arrived. He had had a wonderful time. They would talk again when they had time. After a while, they were met by a female guide who led them to the dormitory. MC reflected that before this, they had been in the administrative building where the affairs of the entire region were conducted. Nearby was the Lord's residence and the dormitory for them, the students. Incidentally, these three buildings are two-story stone structures. Without a doubt, these are some of the most majestic buildings in the capital of these lands. The first floor of the dorm houses rooms for boys, the second for girls. Once inside the dorm, Maya climbed the stairs and said she was going to the second floor. See you later. The protagonist thought about his room being at the very end. And in the dorm, you have to have a roommate. He wondered what he was like. He knocked on the door, entered, and said he was counting on him from now on. His name was Ash. Arthur, the Lord's younger brother, introduced himself with a smile and added that he should address him informally. The MC thought about whether his roommate was the very one Itsuki had mentioned, asking him to befriend him. He was the Lord's brother, Arthur Amanobe Sakurai. He shook his hand and said he hoped they would become friends. The protagonist thought about it, confused. He had heard it called younger brother, but he was a girl, right? She reflected on how she had found herself here as Arthur a month ago. Back then, she was still entangled in this lie about her name. Back then, she was still herself. She was born in the royal capital, and around her, there were only people who approached her to take advantage of her position. People who considered her very existence an annoying nuisance. A brother who saw her as an enemy, and a father who always found a reason not to help her in any way. There were only people like that. One word, one action of hers could be used for someone's own gain and cause trouble for countless people. So she stopped talking about what she wanted and what she needed and began to simply sit alone in her room. But the problems around her grew ever more serious, and eventually, she was forced to hide her origins and leave the capital. At the insistence of those around her, she was forced to conceal both her origins and her gender. Thus arose the story that Arthur, the son of the border Count Sakura, born in the capital, had come here to take part in an education among other children, in gunsekai. So Arthur is a lie, created to protect her from the capital's strife. She must endure it, because this lie exists for her sake. She can't bother the people from the border, Count Sakura's domain, who agreed to help her. Everything is fine. Enduring is what she knows best. Until now, she had endured everything alone. It's just that now another lie will be added to it. From this day on, she will live quietly, trying not to stand out and forging a smile so no one will notice the deception. Here, she will have to live like a boy. After that, MC thought he was in trouble. This is, after all, a room in a men's dormitory. But the person he will be sharing the room with, no matter how you look at it, is not he, but she. Arthur comes from an influential family, but in appearance he is too different from Lord Itsuki and Yuika for them to be safely mistaken for siblings. It seems Arthur was born from the second wife the current border count took in the capital. If he were naive enough to calmly accept the simple explanation of their half-blood, his life would be much easier. That is, she dresses as a boy to appear as one, and she probably has a reason that must not be revealed under any circumstances. Whatever the reason, it's best for him not to pry unnecessarily, and at the same time, he can't clumsily pretend he didn't notice. If they share a room, sooner or later, he's bound to slip up somewhere. Once she realizes he's figured it out, he needs to behave in a way that doesn't leave a bad impression. The worst thing would be if she thought he was deceiving her. Ideally, she'd simply decided he was being tactful. He'd only just arrived in the capital of the realm, and already found himself in a difficult situation. Although, if anything, Arthur is now far more anxious than he is. After all, from her perspective, it looks like she has to hide the fact that she's dressing as a boy while living with a man, but everything will be fine. He's just a safe person who wants to be friends with someone. If, over time, she helps him achieve his dream, he'll be completely satisfied. So, he'll help Arthur first to make her feel at least a little better. The protagonist said that since they were roommates, he'd be pleased if he could talk to him without being too reserved. He was really looking forward to what would happen next. Arthur replied that he was looking forward to it too. He mentioned that he wanted to ask about Maya, who came from the same village as him. Arthur replied that he'd heard of her. She's his niece, right? The protagonist agreed and asked with a smile if maybe he could talk to her too. They might be meeting for the first time, but they were still family. Arthur smiled and agreed, and then asked if he could introduce him. The MC happily agreed and said that he was inviting everyone to be friends. He and Maya were friends, and he was already friends too. And friends of friends are still friends. Does that make him uncomfortable? Arthur replied that he was probably glad. The protagonist smiled and said that was good. Then they should go. They agreed to meet in the hallway as soon as they dropped off their things. Meanwhile, Maya, descending the stairs, joyfully reflected on how she'd successfully said hello to Uncle Itsuki, and now she felt so relieved. From now on, she'd be living in this dorm with Ash. Yes, in the same building. If they started living here together, they'd become closer than ever. And then, maybe, he'll start paying attention to her. And if that happens, she'll always be happy, because she's so crazy about him. At that moment, she remembered Yuika saying that she understood perfectly well that she was crazy about Ash. But what about him? Maya exclaimed that he was talking to her cheerfully. The woman replied that her mother had been there until now, but when she left for the main city of the domain, she would be there alone. There would surely be many things that Ash would be interested in, and there would also be more people who would help him. So she would have to try even harder than before. Otherwise, the day when Ash would be crazy about her might never come. At that moment, Maya was thinking that she couldn't let her head fall in the clouds. She had to pull herself together to be by his side and help him more than anyone else, and so that he would become crazy about her too. She could definitely manage on her own. She could do it too if she tried. So, where was Ash himself? He said his room was at the very end. At that moment, the protagonist opened the door and walked out into the hallway with Arthur. Maya wondered if his roommate was nearby. He looked quiet and fashionable. Clearly, he was a kid from the capital. How lucky he was to be sharing a room with Ash. Actually, she wanted to share a room with him too, but she was a girl, so she couldn't live in the boys' dorm. She looked at Arthur closely and wondered, confused. Isn't he a girl? But somehow he was so cute. The protagonist approached her and apologized for the wait. Maya excitedly exclaimed that she had just arrived. He noticed that it was Arthur, his roommate. The girl greeted him and thought to herself that Ash was acting completely normal around him. So he was a boy after all. Of course, a girl couldn't live in the boys' dorm. She was probably just overly worried about him sharing a room with Ash. But that wasn't right. Judging by his appearance, he also has some pretty cute features. So there are people like that. They'll probably talk a lot now, so she needs to befriend him. He seems like a good person. Arthur asked if he could call her Maya. He's younger, so he was a little hesitant. The girl replied that it made no difference. They were almost the same age, so he could call her that. And she would call him Arthur, and from now on, they would be acquainted. The next day, the three of them went outside in their school uniforms. MC happily exclaimed that they would finally be able to participate in isekai. Arthur mentioned that there would be a lecture at the temple today, so they would go there. He would lead them. He'd been there many times before. On the way, Maya asked what they did at lectures. Arthur replied that they had just arrived, so they hadn't heard the details yet. The goal of isekai is to raise the next generation of people who will lead cities and villages. Broadly speaking, there are two types of subjects, general and military. Both start with the basics and then gradually move on to more complex material. He thought they'd be focusing on the basics for a while. Today, their entire group would be learning to read and write. MC was surprised to hear that they were actually starting with the basics. He'd hoped that since there were so many talented people here, he'd be able to quickly find helpers for his dream. Even in isekai, where the children of influential people in the domains gather, they start with this. He noted that he and Maya already knew how to read and write quite well. Arthur asked in surprise, "Is that true?" He thought he'd heard that Ash was from a family of farmers. The protagonist agreed and added that he'd read all the church books in the village. Arthur asked, Are you talking about the church system of the temple? He'd rarely heard of churches working so well in villages. The priest in their village must be a worthy man. The protagonist replied that he overestimated him. He has some serious traits of a worthless person, so it's better not to praise him too much. Arthur asked what that meant. Was he now wondering what kind of person he was? The protagonist replied that he was generally a good person, but his behavior and lifestyle were extremely unhealthy. So when he talked about him to people, he should be belittled in moderation. Well, he understood. After all, it concerned the dignity of the temple. Arthur laughed and said that he didn't understand anything at all. He hadn't laughed for so long. What were they talking about? About Ash and Maya already knowing how to read and write. MC agreed and said that even going to lectures would be of no use. Arthur replied that those who already knew how could study on their own and read books they liked. He knew how to read and write too. That's why he did it. The protagonist exclaimed that this was wonderful. Maya smiled and remarked that he was lucky. He agreed admiringly and added that one of the reasons he came to the city was the books in the temple. What a choice. The protagonist thought that first he needed to study chemical fertilizers where his research had stalled, and then he needed to expand the base so that more people could operate, so that whatever they did next, it was important to first increase food production. The girl asked if they needed to look for books about fertilizers, compounds, and such, right? The protagonist remarked that, as expected of her, that was correct. Arthur asked if he didn't quite understand, but he wanted to study something. He agreed and added that he wanted something that would increase the harvest in the fields. The boy, perplexed, asked why he was doing such research. Oh, right. He comes from a family of farmers. MC agreed and said that wasn't the only reason. He had a dream of living a comfortable and wealthy life, the kind that only exists in books. He wanted everyone in the village and everyone in the city to eat their fill every day, and not just food, clothing, houses, medicine, entertainment, and everything else. He wants to make everything more comfortable and prosperous so that everyone can live happily. To achieve this, he has a whole mountain of things he wants to do. So for starters, he wanted to learn how to increase the harvest in the fields. Arthur thought about how fun it was to be with everyone. He tentatively asked if he could help too. MC happily exclaimed that he really wanted to. After all, he just said that he could read and write too. Then, he would be an incredibly reliable assistant. Maya noticed that he was simply fired up. Everything was fine, he wasn't scary. Arthur thanked her and said that he had just suddenly become so driven that he was surprised. MC happily exclaimed that since it had been decided, they should hurry to the temple. The two of them called Arthur, who in turn was very happy to have made friends. After some time, they arrived at the temple, specifically the main hall. The protagonist, looking around, remarked that compared to the village church, everything here was truly impressive. Maya added that there were also many priests here. He asked if they'd been told they could read books instead of reading and writing lessons. Arthur agreed and added that they first needed to speak with the priest in charge of isekai. Please let them follow him. At that moment, Yae, the priest, came out and greeted them, saying she was one of the people in charge of Gunsekai's theoretical classes. MC happily introduced himself and thanked her, then noted that he'd sent several letters through Priest Volk asking for books. The girl was very surprised and exclaimed that he was the very same young man Priest Volk had spoken of, the one who had asked for such complex books. The protagonist replied that he thought it was him. Yae clutched her head in her hands and said she felt a little dizzy. Confused, he tried to approach her, when Maya suddenly stopped him and said that the cause of the dizziness shouldn't come any closer. It has too strong an effect on the unprepared, so those seeing it for the first time should be careful. Her mother had also told her not to let Ash interact with others when he was already going crazy. MC wondered in disbelief, was he some kind of uncontrollable cart? Yae apologized and said that he was much younger than she imagined. But these were books, the contents of which almost no one in this temple understood. And she had also heard that he had previously found an important clue to deciphering the ancient language. And was this exceptional child really him? Then he definitely didn't need reading and writing lessons. Maya exclaimed that she thought so too. And she did too, although she of course wasn't so strong as Ash. The priest, smiling, said that she understood. Then they could both read any books of their choice during this time. She hopes they will broaden their horizons and contribute to the city's development. Maya happily thanked her and added that Ash would definitely live up to her expectations. Arthur inquired about this ancient language transcription. The protagonist replied that it was literally a transcription of an ancient language. It was the language of an early ancient civilization. Arthur, perplexed, asked, so, he deciphered those letters that no one could read anymore. He agreed calmly. The boy was immediately shocked and remarked that Maya was right. He really did have a strong effect on people. The protagonist replied that he was only helping a little. Priest Volk just happened to be a researcher of the ancient language. No, he didn't think he could provide even that little help. He wondered if he didn't have memories similar to those from his past life. He wouldn't have been able to either. If he talked about it, maybe they would understand, but they would look at him even more strangely, so he couldn't say. Maya cheerfully remarked that Ash really had a strong effect on people, but it was very interesting to be around him. and something good always happened. Arthur, smiling, said that she was probably right. He'd never seen or even heard of someone like Ash before. Now that he thought about it, it even became interesting. Yai asked if Arthur would be studying with them today. Then she would lead them all to the book depository. After a while, they entered a massive library with an endless supply of books. MC, looking around, said in shock that it looked like there were about 20 times more books here than in the village church. There would definitely be something to read here. He thought that even in the center of the domain, this was still the level of an ordinary book room. So the books were so valuable, and the library from his past life was based on vast resources and advanced technology. He wanted more libraries of this scale to appear in this life. And to do that, he first needed to study fertilizers, because food is the basis of everything. It is the foundation that determines the level of civilization. It's unlikely that they would understand terms like natural science or chemistry here. The protagonist approached the priest and asked if there were shelves with books on the sciences that flourished in the ancient civilization. Yai replied that it was difficult to answer that question. She thinks such books are kept only in the temple in the royal capital. According to temple teachings, temples in various cities and village churches keep certain books, namely those that might be useful in newly developed cities. Books with practical content are preserved first. MC thought about it. Indeed, the village church did have many books on practical topics. For example, a plant reference book, a practical book on livestock, and books on agriculture. But among them were many books that couldn't be put to immediate use. Books on agriculture were precisely such a book. Perhaps many years have passed since the temple compiled its list of useful books, and during this time, the knowledge and technology needed to apply these books have disappeared from people's lives. Ultimately, they might simply no longer be relevant to current conditions. The books already exist, and if the wisdom passed down from the past isn't properly utilized, it's terribly wasteful. This way, knowledge and technology will be lost even faster. The protagonist noted that perhaps in the future, the temple will have to change its approach to which books need to be passed on to which places. Yai agreed and added that among them, the priests, there were those who questioned the wisdom of simply preserving the old teachings unchanged. Some believed that some of the teachings might no longer be relevant to the current state of affairs. The temple, of course, is a large organization, and it can't be changed overnight. But, as they say, the temple's teachings were also created by priests, people like themselves. Therefore, to accept them, preserve them, and pass them on to the future, they, the people of today, must reflect and seek better solutions. And there's nothing presumptuous about that. MC smiled and said that he deeply respected such a view. It was truly wonderful. As someone born in a frontier village of farmers, he sincerely asked her to bestow upon them the temple's new wisdom. Yai smiled and replied that if that was the temple's duty, they would respond with all sincerity. He happily added that he too would support the temple in any way he could. Since practical books were already available, he suggested starting with books on agriculture. Afterwards, the protagonist picked up a few books and said they would split up and look at books from around here first. He wanted to learn about fertilizers, so they should mainly look at the chapters on soil and planting methods. Words to pay attention to were fertilizer, compost, pest control, and the like. He was very grateful that Priest Yai would also be helping them. The girl replied with a smile, saying that she was in charge of Gunshikai after all. She thought she could be of assistance with books on this topic. MC gave Arthur a book and said that it would be very helpful later if he briefly summarized what it said. The guy took the book, began reading, and his expression changed dramatically. He asked if there seemed to be some unfamiliar words in it. Arthur apologized and explained that there were so many words in there that he didn't even know. The protagonist replied that it was a book about agriculture. After all, given his position, many of the words were probably unfamiliar. Then he suggested they start reading together. He would explain the basic terms for fieldwork and farming tools. Arthur agreed and apologized again. He replied that he didn't need to apologize. He'd asked him to help, so he should be the one thanking him. He'd never done any farming before, had he? So there would be a lot of new things here. And that's wonderful. Learning something you didn't know was so much fun. He suggested enjoying it as much as possible. It described how to plow a field, how fine the soil should be, how firm, how high the beds should be. Different crops have different soil requirements. There was also an old name for onions. He'd seen it in a cookbook in the village church. Did he like onions? After that, the protagonist joyfully exclaimed that they'd found compost here. He wanted to know how to make it and how to use it. At that moment, Maya called out to him and noted that she had something similar here too. The protagonist looked in the book and said that it described the characteristics of organic fertilizers and types of compost. So there were different types, and this one had different compositions and applications. The girl replied that it didn't say how to do that. The protagonist agreed and said they should look at other books. At that moment, Arthur read from a book about a method for making compost, the basic ingredients being as follows. He suddenly rushed over and exclaimed, "Was that in that book?" The guy replied that he didn't quite understand, but thought it might be it. MC read it and said it seemed to talk about using chicken manure. Arthur thoughtfully wondered if maybe there was something there not only in farming books, but also in animal husbandry books. He exclaimed admiringly that such a possibility was definitely there. Maya, surprised, said he was smart. Arthur sheepishly replied that he hadn't done anything special. The protagonist said that was a wonderful observation. He was right. They didn't have to limit themselves to farming books. Perhaps books in other fields could describe something even more thoroughly. That's why it's important to have more people. Not only does the work speed increase, but it also allows for research from different perspectives. Maya noted with a smile. He'd said before that assistants are strength. MC said that finding assistants was also one of the reasons he came to the main city of the domain. Arthur's help is truly a big help. Thanks to him, their further research will proceed much faster. The guy smiled and replied that he would try to be even more useful then. First, he needed to learn the basics of agriculture. The protagonist agreed and said that they needed to learn more and more. It was good that they could gain so much new information. Yay. Watching this, thought with a smile that perhaps these children really would one day change the future of this city and this entire country. After some time, MC noted that so far he had only managed to get a general overview, but if things continue this way, it looked like they would gather the information needed to create fertilizers faster than he thought. First, he wanted to thank Priest Ye and Arthur for their help. Maya exclaimed with a smile that it was hers. The protagonist paused, happy that the research was going so smoothly. It seems his studies here were worthwhile after all. He came to the capital of the domain to gain knowledge, resources, and connections unavailable in Nosaka village, and with this, to restore civilization. He recalls what Yuika once said. He wanted to live a comfortable and wealthy life, the kind only found in books, like the legends of ancient civilization. His goal is the various fruits of human intelligence, dormant in ancient civilization: food and alcohol, lighting and shelter, comfortable cars and transportation. He wants to revive all the benefits of civilization and achieve a prosperous life. But to fulfill this dream, his hands alone would be insufficient. 100 men wouldn't be enough, or even 10,000. He needed more. A huge number of powerful assistants. He understood this, but it was difficult to achieve in a village, whereas in the main city of the domain, he could gather such assistants. Researching fertilizers was only the first step. Building on this work, he would need to seriously focus on building connections. After some time, they entered the temple's large auditorium. Ye remarked that a lecture on military affairs would be held in this room afterward. They should please wait until the instructor arrived. MC considered this. They said that one of the goals of isekai is to train commanders who will strengthen the defenses of cities and villages. Perhaps this lecture was also part of that training. In Nosakure village, in case of an emergency, the village headman was also supposed to gather the young villagers and lead them. Despite his appearance, he was insanely strong. When he was approved for training here, he was told that it would be a good idea to at least master the basics of martial arts. He trained him for several months, and then he understood it very well. Not only were his movements completely invisible, but he also twirled his sword endlessly. If he hadn't left the village, he wouldn't have had to fight the bear and nearly died. He certainly wouldn't have had to. He wouldn't even have been surprised to hear that he defeated the bear with his bare hands. At that moment, George Balius, the military science teacher, entered the classroom. He greeted Yai and said that from now on he would be under their supervision during theoretical classes. The girl looked a little embarrassed, agreed, and added that they were glad. Suddenly, George and the protagonist caught each other's gaze. He wondered, perplexed. Had it just seemed like they'd met for a moment? The teacher took his seat and said that he would be giving lectures for a while. He had been awarded the title of knight, let everyone take their seats, and they would begin the lecture. After a while, the lecture ended. MC wondered if they'd been taught the structure of military equipment during the lecture. It seemed the weapons used far more metal than he'd thought. As for the city walls, built of stone, they'd probably learn about them later. That way, they could get a real sense of the city's resource situation and technological level. He'd really like to ask him about a lot of things outside of lectures, but being a knight meant he was in active service. He was probably very busy. He wished he could find a way to talk to him. Suddenly, George himself called out to him and asked if he could interrupt him for a moment. Forgive him for the suddenness, but could he know his name? Ash introduced himself and added that he came from the village of Nosakure. The teacher exclaimed in surprise. So he was right. The thing is, he's his father's cousin David. He's his great uncle. Hadn't he told him anything about him? MC said that, come to think of it, his father had said before that there was someone in their family who became a knight, so it was him. George agreed and said they'd talk again sometime. He had other work to do after today. The protagonist happily said he'd be happy to get to know him properly later. He wondered who would have thought the gentleman would be his relative. What a wonderful connection he'd made. He absolutely had to get closer to him and ask him about everything. Besides, he was curious about the relationship between Priest Ye and Mr. George. After a while, they went outside. Maya wondered if Mr. George was related to Ash. After all, they even had similar faces. But they'd been thinking so much that she was already hungry. It could hardly be dinner time. Arthur remarked that he wanted the two of them to help him with the food preparation. In the dormitory, food preparation is done on a rotating basis, and they, the residents, take turns. He'd heard it was part of the military training for when there was a camp. Although the cooks from the ruler's estate come to the dormitory themselves, so they were simply helping them. They're on room duty. Today, it's he and Ash, and another couple, Maya and her roommate. At that moment, Reina Batiar approached them, introduced herself, and said she was counting on them today. The girl happily exclaimed that she'd be with her. Reina called out to the protagonist and asked if she could call him by his first name. He should forgive her. She'd heard they'd arrived yesterday and wanted to stop by to say hello, but she was overwhelmed with work. He replied that it was no big deal. He should have come up to her sooner and introduced himself. Arthur remarked that she was always very busy. She really was great. Reina thanked him and added that he should also let her know right away if any problems arose. He said that everything was fine now. Today, during independent study, Ash and Maya called him over. By the way, Reina can also read and write, and she's also good at counting. MC asked in surprise, "Can she even count?" She agreed, adding that her mother had taught her. Her family was a line of hereditary servants, serving the house of the border Count Sakura for generations. She was also studying to become a worthy servant like her mother, he said in surprise, so she must have received an excellent education. If she had such abilities, he had a favor to ask. It seemed she had remarkable skills. Besides, she was not only Maya's neighbor, but also a close friend of Arthur's. If she didn't mind, he would be very happy if she could help them with their research during their independent study sessions in her free time. Reina was slightly taken aback and replied that if she could help in any way, she would be happy. The protagonist, with incredible joy, exclaimed that he would invite her during their next independent study sessions. Maya grabbed his hand and said, "She told you to be careful with new people." Arthur remarked with a smile. He was gradually beginning to realize that moments like these simply carried him away. He calmed down and, apologizing, asked if they were going on kitchen duty now. Arthur apologized for having everything fall on them so quickly after their arrival and explained that they hadn't had roommates before, so until today they were excused from duty. The protagonist said that preparing dinner was a big deal then. He suggested they all go help together. Maya inquired what exactly they were supposed to do, preserving food or plucking chickens. Arthur, observing this, remarked that, judging by their appearance, they both knew how to cook. Reina agreed, adding that they would be a great help. After a while, they arrived in the dorm kitchen. Chef Jack, with an incredibly menacing expression, said he didn't care who they were or where they were from. In the kitchen, it didn't matter. From now on, he would treat them like apprentice chefs. If they didn't like it, then let them cook a delicious meal and prove otherwise. The protagonist introduced himself and said he was glad to meet him. The cook also introduced himself and exclaimed, "Let them wash their hands thoroughly. They'll get to work right away. Cooking must be done quickly and carefully." He reflected that after arriving at the dorm yesterday, he'd managed to eat dinner the following day, and both times the food had been incredibly delicious. That's how he cooked. He didn't think he'd been particularly good at cooking in his past life, but in this one, life itself had trained him well. He helped his mother, learned making meals while hunting with Van, and when he managed to get his hands on expensive ingredients, he showed them how to use them. The dishes, based on his past life's knowledge, turned out to be unusual, and people rejoiced. He thought it was difficult to cook well with limited ingredients and equipment, but the head cook's dishes were magnificent. Despite his gloomy appearance, he has incredible skills. MC took the prepared food and exclaimed admiringly, "It's magnificent. This is a wonderful way of cooking. This way, you can save firewood and still get almost the same effect as long frying and stewing." Yak said he was glad. He immediately realized how useful it was. He grew up in the village, right? Ash agreed and noted that he was the son of a farmer. The chef said that was excellent. There are still many tricks that can be used. Let him memorize them. Well, Maya, watching this, said, "Who would have thought that Ash would even blurt out words in the kitchen? He was too complicated." The protagonist happily exclaimed that he was offering her to learn the head chef's techniques too. And the other two should prepare too. They will cook with full dedication. After that, they began practicing cooking. Yak noted that he was also a good teacher. MC asked, "Is that true? Maybe because he already had experience?" Maya said with a smile that he had helped her a lot back then. He replied that she was a good cook to begin with. He just gave a couple of small tips. The chef asked, "Is this boy a good cook?" Maya smiled and said that his dishes were very popular in the village. He asked which of his dishes she considered the most delicious. The girl thoughtfully remarked that Ash had many unusual dishes, so she doubted it. Probably the hamburger. Confused, Yak asked what kind of dish it was. The protagonist replied that it was some kind of meatball. He inquired about the meat used, what was special about it. The protagonist suggested they cook it together sometime. It seemed easier to get pork and beef in the city, and there were more seasonings. Since they had the opportunity, they would make the best hamburger. Yak noted that the market was full of crooks. If he bought it from a bad shop, there would be problems later. He would introduce him to the butcher, who supplied the estate with meat, and tell him where to get good seasonings. The protagonist happily exclaimed that this would be very useful. He reflected on his principle of returning kindness with kindness. Ash asked if a portion of hamburger would do as thanks. Yak replied with a smile that he liked smart people. The MC reflected on how many good encounters he had had today. He wants to ask Mr. George about military matters. Reina has agreed to help him research fertilizers, and head chef Jack seems ready to teach him cooking techniques and point him to good shops. Thanks to all these people, he suddenly feels like his dream is much closer. At this rate, he'll definitely be closer to a rich life. Sometime later, they met again in the library. The protagonist noted that, thanks to Reina's help, they'd managed to gather quite a bit of information about fertilizers. She'd been a great help. The girl replied that she was glad she could be of help. But there really are so many different types of fertilizers, and each has completely different effects. Arthur added that some take years to make. The protagonist agreed, adding that this is precisely why they need to prioritize and conduct experiments. He wondered if, for some reason, chemical fertilizers had always been on his mind since the village, but now that he thought about it, that should definitely be put off until later. So they'd start with something else. Bone meal seems the fastest option, but manure compost takes a long time to mature, so it's best to start early. However, given the work itself, it's difficult for him to ask the girls for help. It looks like he'll have to try it alone first. There's still a lot to consider, but if everything works out, the yield can definitely be greatly increased. In the future, he wants to scale up the project so that this fertilizer can be used in neighboring towns and villages, thereby increasing food production throughout the estate. He thinks this major project should be called an agricultural improvement plan. Incidentally, during the research, one problem was discovered. It turns out that the use of manure compost is currently strictly prohibited. Long ago, a major epidemic broke out due to the use of compost made from human waste, and in one case, an entire city perished. The protagonist thoughtfully remarked that it seemed they understood this not as human waste being dangerous, but as any animal waste is dangerous. Although, with proper processing, everything should be safe. So, to conduct the experiment with manure compost, he needed to prove its safety and obtain Lord Itsuki's permission. They would draw up a plan, including sanitary control methods. That's it. They would study medical books from now on. He begged them to work a little harder. With that, the plan was successfully completed, and they decided to first submit it to Lady Rein, the dormitory manager, for review. She quickly checked the contents, and, it seemed, passed the report on to the acting governor, Lord Itsuki. MC thought that, incidentally, Lady Rein occupied one of the highest positions among the maids in the house of the border Count Sakurai, and she served as the dormitory manager as part of her job as a maid. And as it turned out, she was also Rein's mother. Now he understood why she was so focused. And then one day, while they were waiting for the plan to be approved, George arrived. The protagonist asked if he had something urgent. He replied that he had a lot of work piling up managing the army's property. Let him forgive him, but he'll have to work on his own. Could he pass this on to everyone? MC thought he seemed very busy. He was renowned as an important vassal of Lord Itsuki. He probably had many special assignments personally from the acting governor. He didn't understand military matters, but perhaps he could help with property management. He said that as an independent study, he'd like to see how he works. Is there anything he could help with? He could at least be useful with carrying things, and he can read too. If he gets in the way, he'll go read books at the temple. But if he can help, he's willing to help not just today but in the future. George said that since he can read and write, that's fine. Besides, he barely had time to talk to him. He'll ask him for help. Maya, smiling, said that she'll pass on the message to everyone then. She mused that, as expected of Ash, he immediately starts something new. After a while, they arrived at the domain's army property warehouse. The MC, seeing the incredible amount of various equipment, asked in surprise, "Does it all need to be inspected?" George agreed, adding that they needed to count it, inspect the damage, and decide what to repair and what to write off. The protagonist looked at 3 more assistants and asked, "Does this need to be done manually, one at a time, and with so many people?" George agreed, explaining that in case of an emergency, they stored a huge amount of equipment for the reserve force so that all the city's residents could fight. Every year at this time, everything was supposed to be inspected at once. The MC, horrified, thought this was madness. Such a large amount of work couldn't be handled by such a small group, and the fact that Mr. George was personally on site was also strange. Was he really so serious that he was trying to take on both the management and the on-site work himself? The protagonist took a spear and said that he proposed revising the property management procedures. The man asked if he had any good ideas. He replied that they would create teams of several people and asked the managers to report back on the inspection results. If everything was properly organized, it would be possible to prevent both theft and errors, and he wouldn't have to personally go to the site. Work that anyone could do was best delegated to others. He probably had many tasks that only he could handle. George agreed with him and added that there were other things only he could do. He gave him a valuable opinion. If he didn't mind, he could continue to advise him on such matters. MC happily agreed and said he could consider him an apprentice, a candidate for assistant, and feel free to approach him. Itsuki, surprised, clarified, an apprentice assistant? In knightly families, it was true that children of relatives sometimes helped their parents, but he had never encountered such a thing. The protagonist said yes, he could consider it something like that. After all, they were related by blood. He would be useful. The man thought for a moment and then said, "It sounds reliable. Then, he's counting on him." The protagonist exclaimed, "Yes." Afterwards, while helping George with his work, He drafted a proposal for property management and revised it in the dorm. Then, together, they presented the report to Itsuki. Since the idea was his, he explained the proposal himself. He was praised for his outstanding assistance with George's work and even awarded a prize. MC suggested, so instead of a reward, could he first read the plan handed over by the dorm manager, Miss Rein? Itsuki asked in surprise. A plan from Rein? Finding what he needed among the pile of papers on the desk, he said, it seems to be this. An agricultural improvement plan. The protagonist noted they'd drawn it up as part of their Gunshikai training. He'd be very grateful if they'd consider it. Itsuki replied, I see. Then he'd check it out. The protagonist exclaimed, he really begs for it. He thought, who would have thought that this would also speed up the agricultural improvement plan? Now they could move on. A few days later, MC was overjoyed. The plan had been approved, and it had become the ruler's official project. They had also been allocated a budget. Now, it seemed, things would be much easier. However, since they would be using manure compost, which had previously been considered taboo, they were strictly instructed that it could only be used in the dormitory garden. To scale it up in the future, they needed to conduct thorough experiments and prove its safety. The protagonist began production trials. Rein and Reina looked in surprise at what he had prepared. The manager asked what he was doing. He replied, as stated in the plan, that he was simply processing consumables for sanitation. Reina admitted that yes, she admitted that the plan did indeed specify the need for cleaning supplies. Arthur added, but what he was making now is almost impossible to obtain even in the royal capital. They say most of the supplies are intended only for the royal family. Rein thoughtfully remarked, a rare item, monopolized by the royal family. Could it really be that they were creating this right before her eyes? Arthur replied, yes, unfortunately. He thought in surprise, the royal family monopolizes? That's why they didn't even have this in the main city of the domain. Out loud he answered, it's soap. Rein exclaimed in surprise, soap. She was half fainting. Maya drew his attention. The reaction seemed to be complete. He replied, oh indeed. Stirring the concoction, he said that when it was ready, as usual, he would test it on himself first. Arthur remarked in surprise, who would have thought that the manufacturing method hidden by the House of Roish could be so easily reproduced here. The protagonist asked in bewilderment, so, the soap in the royal capital is produced by this house, the House of Roish? He replied, yes. He'd heard that this house had risen to the level of major merchants and monopolized the sale of soap. MC thought in surprise, that's just a method for making soap. Wasn't there too much knowledge lying around? And with this, they'd become major merchants. Rein said regretfully, how could she report this now? If she made a mistake, her relationship with the major merchants in their royal capital could deteriorate. Everyone looked at her sympathetically. MC sheepishly apologized. A few days later, to move on to the next stage, the protagonist came here, outside the city walls. Taking out a jar, he said to Belgo, so here's a prototype of a sanitary product. He's asking him to help him with an experiment to test its effects. The prisoner looked at him in confusion. What was he talking about? The other prisoners also listened with interest to the conversation, eyeing him warily. The protagonist noted, they're not exactly welcoming him. These people, city prisoners. He came here because their punishment is waste collection, including city sewage, and if he wants to increase the number of people working with the forbidden manure compost, then, as Itsuki said, he'll have to ask them. First, they'll test the soap's effectiveness and improve sanitation, and then they'll move straight to composting. Personally, he's very happy about the increased workforce. But how can he convince them? Belgo said he's talking nonsense. He hates people like him more than anything. Let him get out of here. Two girls passing by exclaimed, how scary! He answered them rudely, and what were they staring at? The girls quickly retreated. Belgo pushed MC away and grumbled, everyone's looking down on them. The protagonist, mustering up his resolve, asked, if he wasn't mistaken, his name was Belgo. He came from a family of carpenters, the youngest of the brothers, and now his older brother had inherited their house, right? Belgo chuckled and asked, so what? He was trying to pressure his family? The protagonist replied with a smile, of course not. He wanted to ask him for work, so he wondered what kind of people they were and asked Itsuki about it. Belgo looked at him with surprise and a frown. He continued, by the way, he thought he had his reasons for leaving home, but he still knew how to do carpentry, right? Belgo replied, of course. Although, in a place like this, the opportunity to demonstrate his skills doesn't come along often. He built many of the huts here. MC was surprised. Really? To build something like that out of rotten and chipped wood? He has excellent skills, Belgo gloomily remarked. Even if he had the skills, what's the point if he doesn't care if he inherits the house? The protagonist looked at him, confused. The protagonist told Belgo, that's why, going back to the original conversation, there's an opportunity to use his carpentry skills for pay. How does that sound to him? Wouldn't he like to try it? The man clenched his fists and replied gloomily that if the story proved boring, he'd throw him out on the spot. The protagonist laughed and thanked him. He'd really helped him out. He'd been racking his brains over where to get a shed for composting, and now it was all decided. Then they'd start with the soap experiment. When he used it, there was no itching or pain, but he wanted to check if other people would have problems. Belgo stared at him in bewilderment. MC said it was like washing dirt with lye. You first need to add water and then lather it up, but it would be easier to demonstrate. Let him be an example. He grabbed the man's arm and dragged him along. Belgo was indignant. What was he doing? He said he was improving sanitation and conducting an experiment. Tell him to follow him and take off his clothes quickly, Belgo screamed. Was he making fun of him? He shows some suspicious thing and thinks he'll agree right away? What kind of poison is this? The protagonist said he's a grown man, but he's acting so pathetic. He was indignant. What? Pathetic. The protagonist continued. Even such a small child had already used it and tested it on himself. If he's so afraid after this, it will look pathetic from the outside. Belgo sarcastically remarked, well, he's got a sharp tongue. The villagers started laughing at him. He quickly took off all his clothes and said, okay, he's ready. MC asked him to turn his back. Rubbing his back, he added, if it hurts, let him tell. Belko screamed. He clarified, does it hurt? The man replied, no, just in case. Then, let him be careful. The protagonist promised him this. After a while, he joyfully exclaimed, what a wonderful cleansing power. He called the villagers and said, let everyone see this. Isn't that impressive? A clean stripe ran across Belgo's dirty back, where MC had washed his skin. Belgo exclaimed, what is this? What on earth is going on? The protagonist handed him some soap and offered to try it himself. When Belgo finished lathering himself, he saw dirty foam and asked in surprise, that's dirt, right? Wow, that's amazing. The protagonist turned to the villagers and offered them a try too. They were already trying it though. If they felt an itch or anything, let them tell me right away. The men started washing, happily chatting among themselves. It was a nice touch. That was refreshing. MC added, by the way, you can wash clothes with it. So they could wash not only their bodies, but also the dirt off their clothes. The prisoners started talking excitedly. Really? That's awesome. Now they'll be able to eat their food properly. The smell clings to their clothes, and no matter what they do, it still smells bad. The protagonist suggested to Belgo that actually, you could even wash your hair with this. The man clarified, really? That's just great. He looked at Ash and asked what he would gain from all this, what he was doing for them. The protagonist paused and replied, sanitation is the bare minimum. If the sanitation is poor, an epidemic could break out. Belgo noted with surprise. No one had done this before. He said, that's the problem, that they hadn't done it before. After all, they weren't death row prisoners. While they were serving their sentences, they should live healthy and decent lives. All the prisoners fell silent in surprise and looked at him. He thought about it. It seemed like many of these people, starting with Belgo, were born into families of artisans, but due to poverty, their parents abandoned them, or they left home because they felt unwanted. Then, with nothing to eat, they committed petty crimes and became criminals. There seemed to be many such cases. If there had been enough food from the start, they might not have left home and become criminals. If there had been an environment where people could eat normally and work normally, everything would have been different for them. He said out loud that the composting work he was asking them to do now would probably be very difficult. But at the same time, it was very important work. If this worked and they could increase the amount of food throughout the city, people would no longer have to suffer from hunger, and perhaps there would be fewer who, like them, were forced to turn to crime. So please, let them lend him their strength. The future of this city needs their help. All the prisoners looked at him, confused. Belgo looked perplexed. Frankly, he didn't really understand what he was talking about. He didn't understand, but he was saying that they could be at least a little useful. He turned to the others and exclaimed, then they will do it. The prisoners agreed. Of course, after such words they can't help but agree. If the job involves stirring waste, then they really can be useful for that. Work, not punishment. It's been a while since something like this has happened. If that's what they can do, let him leave it to them. The protagonist smiled happily and said, thank you all very much. From now on, he's counting on them. The prisoners responded, and they responded to him. He added, of course, he'll work with them too. The prisoners hesitated. Will he really be able to handle it? The protagonist pointed out they'll be working with fertilizer. Of course, he wasn't going to just dump everything on them. Soap would be regularly distributed, and if the fertilizer worked out, he'd even bring in tasty vegetables. The prisoners exclaimed joyfully, will they even get food? This is absolutely fantastic. Meanwhile, Itsuki, examining the documents, was lost in thought. Two children from the ruler's family, Maya and Arthur, were participating in the current gunshikai. To avoid any problems, the best people had been assigned to them. Rein as the dorm supervisor, Yae on the temple side, and George for the military lectures. Apparently, thanks to this, everything proceeded peacefully and without delays. At least, so he thought. But then everything went wrong. What does successful soap production mean? One student recreated a secret technology. They came up with something too killer from the very beginning. And as luck would have it, from that troubled Roicha family. Who would have thought that he would produce such an incredible result? What exactly happened there? Someone explain it to him, and in simpler terms, please. His assistants looked at him confusedly. Yae remarked, in simpler terms then. Then they'll have to work really hard. He asked. She knew about this, of course, so he really did make soap, as expected of Ash. Yae replied, like a priest, she swore an oath to the three gods to work for the restoration and spread of knowledge, and from now on, she will spare no effort to help him. Itsuki thought, aha, so that's how it is. She deliberately didn't report it because they could stop him? Yae pointed out that this should have been written in the plan. He muttered, when had he even thought about it in such detail? The priest added, besides, Ash is unstoppable. He clarified why. He's so polite, smart. Yes, he looks like a child you can reason with. George remarked that if we're talking about how compliant he is, That should be something to think about first. Rin said that's definitely not the case. Yae agreed. That's definitely not the case. Gunshikai goes without a hitch after all. Still, it's worth thinking about. How was it that something like that plan for improving agriculture had reached him? Itsuki chuckled thoughtfully, wondering if Rin had provided the plan. Yae had helped with the research and kept it under wraps so the land wouldn't be stopped. And then Ash had come with George, and instead of a reward, had asked to read the plan. His 3 trusted Gunshikai watchers, they hadn't fallen under that boy's influence, had they? George had said he was asking him to remember it. With his politeness and intelligence, Ash would see everything he set out to do through to the end. Itsuki mentally turned to his sister and brother-in-law. What on earth had they sent them? After a while, the protagonist bowed to the prisoners and said, "That's it then, he'll be counting on them again today." They had replied, "Okay, they'll continue where they left off." He thought that since they'd gotten along with the prisoners, their days had been spent in chores and composting. With the assistance of head chef Yak, he arranged for the farm workers to supply manure, and yet he still participates in the Gunshikai. Composting is truly difficult. Not only does the material smell terrible, but it also gets hot. Belgo, watching him, asked, "Will he really be able to handle it?" The protagonist said how fortunate they were to have Belgo and the others. He thought that since they were having such a hard time, he should thank them properly. He brought them various things, clothes, food, firewood, and they were incredibly happy, exclaiming, "So much stuff! Thank him so much!" They took the food especially well. Some even started cooking for fun. Several months passed in this manner. When spring ended and summer was approaching, the manure compost was successfully prepared. They immediately tried it in the dorm garden and were amazed at the results. With the fertilizer, they got a great harvest. Rin happily declared, "The fruits grew simply wonderful." He replied, "Yes, compared to a plot without compost, the difference in size and quantity is obvious. Of course, it's impossible to draw definitive conclusions based on just these 2 plots, but for a first attempt, this is a very encouraging result." Reina noted that the research was difficult, but seeing the results is so satisfying. "That's right," she said, surprised. Maya exclaimed, "And yet, this really is much larger than the ones they ate in the village, and much more beautiful. If this fertilizer could be used in the village, everyone would be very happy." The protagonist replied, "Exactly. This time, everything worked, but as they discovered, there are many more different types of fertilizer. Moreover, the results will vary depending on the type of crop and the condition of the soil. To achieve the same effect on other lands and with other crops, they will have to continue to conduct a wide variety of experiments." So he asks them to continue helping them. Everyone happily agreed, saying that this means this is far from the end. After some time, the protagonist was writing something intently in a notebook. Arthur cautiously approached him from behind and began to observe what he was doing there. The notebook contained the results for manure compost. He thought, "I see, Ash is summing up the results of today's experiment." He read the next entry. What needs to be tested next? In the case of chicken manure, when changing the amount of fertilizer. Arthur thought, so there will be such experiments in the future. So topics for further research. Water and windmill technology, book production, agricultural implements. Isn't that too much? Metallurgy and construction technologies. And that's not all. Medicine and road construction. This can't be. MC turned his head sharply towards him and smiled. Arthur flinched in surprise and exclaimed, was he playing a joke on him? The protagonist assured him, not at all. Does he look like someone who would play a joke? He didn't agree and insisted on his own, but he was playing a joke on her, right? They looked at each other, then Arthur apologized. The protagonist said it was okay. Besides, it was true that he'd accidentally written down something that wasn't really necessary right now. The guy exclaimed that he'd known it. So he'd been playing a prank after all. The MC laughed and said that the more he wrote, the more she leaned forward with such an intrigued look, so he couldn't resist. Arthur replied sheepishly that when he saw how much he wanted to do, he was worried that he was pushing himself too hard, because he'd never done anything like this before. And for some reason, he felt amused. The protagonist said he was glad to hear it. There was still so much fun ahead for them. According to his plans, it wouldn't end even after his death, so let them enjoy it as much as they wanted. Arthur looked at him in bewilderment and thought, so much to do. So much to do. So many things he could do. What would happen if he took on all this? Probably, as Ash says, it would be a fun time. But is he really allowed to do this? Sometime later, Arthur had a dream. He saw a bag and said, what a wonderful thing. The maid started whispering. He clearly favored that same master. So she decided to join that faction? He replied sheepishly, no, that's not what he meant at all. Suddenly, Arthur saw a bird in the window and walked closer. The maids started talking among themselves again. It seemed he wanted to go outside. Apparently, his current surroundings didn't suit him. Then it turns out he was the one who orchestrated that incident too. They're spreading unpleasant rumors about him again. The reason was that he'd recently gone outside. Doesn't he understand the consequences of his whims? What a problematic person he is. It would be better if he stayed indoors and kept quiet. Arthur covered his face with his hands, imagining himself a bird in a cage, and thought, say nothing, ask for nothing. If he just sat here alone, it would be better. He felt cold, heavy, painful, scared, but he forced himself to endure. It was as if he was freezing completely. Maybe it would be better to turn into real ice? At that moment, as if through a veil, he saw the protagonist, who asked if he was okay. Arthur, surprised, clarified, was it him? The protagonist answered, yes, it was him. He wished him good morning. although it was still too early for that. It seemed he had had a nightmare and he was worried. Arthur rubbed his eyes and said, he must have had a bad dream, but now everything is fine, thank you. He said, I see. Then they can drink warm tea. He looked at him perplexedly and said, he said everything is fine. MC insisted. He brought aromatic herbs from the village. Let him wait a little. Arthur exclaimed, he didn't need to bother so much, he's really okay now. The protagonist smiled and replied, then that'll be a sign he's feeling better. He'll go get some hot water, he thought in surprise. Wow, it looks like Ash won't let him just endure it. After a while they were sitting and drinking tea. He thanked her for waiting for him. Arthur thanked him for his concern, and after tasting the tea, declared it delicious. The protagonist said it was an herbal tea he'd read about in a book in the village. It helps you sleep soundly. Arthur repeated, sleep soundly, that's how it is. After a moment's silence, she thanked him. Fertilizer. It's good that everything worked out. The protagonist agreed with him and said that everyone worked together, and it wasn't in vain. Arthur said he really was amazing. When it turned out that manure compost was considered forbidden, he did a ton of research to get permission. When he was short-handed, he approached both Priest Yai and Master George. He even went to the prisoners to ask for help, and in the end, he truly succeeded with the fertilizer. Even to him, although he knew next to nothing about farming, he was constantly explaining all sorts of things. He gave him so many funny moments. He was truly glad he came to Sakura and met him. The royal capital had so many different things to offer, but he'd never considered it a fun place. Only after meeting Ash did he feel like he was having fun from the heart for the first time. And besides, if it weren't for him, even in Sakura, people would probably have approached him simply because he was the child of a border count. He understands that with his position, this is inevitable, but if they were going to use him anyway, he wanted them to see not his blood or his lineage, but himself. Even just a little bit would be enough. Okay, let him forgive him. He suddenly started saying strange things. Let him ignore it. MC replied that he didn't know what he'd been through before. But now it wasn't because he was being taken advantage of. It was because someone had hurt him. People had probably approached him with malicious intent. He might not be able to easily erase this pain with his own hands, but he could still listen. After all, he was here now, and not everyone who approached him was malicious. There were those who turned to him because they wanted his help. These were people like himself. Arthur teared up and asked if he was really helping him. The protagonist replied that he was helping him a lot. That was exactly how it was with the fertilizer. It worked precisely because he'd helped with the research and given them a new idea. Arthur said that he genuinely had fun spending time with him and the others. And if he wanted to continue trying all sorts of things with everyone, was that okay? MC agreed with a smile and remarked that he, too, enjoyed spending time with him. Please, let him stay with them. Arthur, almost bursting into tears, smiled and said that then he should continue to let him help him as much as possible with what he wanted to do. He thanked him for listening. The protagonist replied that he should be the one thanking him. After all, he was planning to ask him for help many more times. Arthur chuckled and said, yeah, right. He'd written down so much. He exclaimed that he had a whole mountain of things he wanted to do. And by the way, there was something he wanted to learn. For future plans, he needed to know more about the other towns and villages within the domain. He wanted to look at a map, but Priest Yai said the temple didn't keep it. Arthur thoughtfully remarked that if the temple didn't have it, then he couldn't immediately think of a place where he could look at a map either. The protagonist agreed and said that then perhaps they should consult with Rein first. After a while, Arthur entered the room and, holding his hands behind his back, remarked that he had brought a gift for him. Ash inquired what it was. He pulled out a map and noted that he did have some status after all. It was necessary when he traveled from the royal capital to Sakura, so he had a map. He had brought it from his room in the ruler's estate. MC happily exclaimed that this was as expected of him. It's true, having wonderful friends is important. Arthur chuckled and replied that he was exaggerating. He smiled and said that he was truly very happy. With a map, it would be much easier to plan how to distribute fertilizer. Ash opened the map and was very surprised.